on top of the coaches helping out with the games throughout the series, of course, it's so much of a game as to how the players themselves respond to the coaching, right? Because not everyone might respond very well to coaching. So,
Mm.
it can be particularly nerve wracking to be instructed either step by step or just generally throughout the game how to play. Some people respond to it really well, right? But either way, as to how it all plays out is something we will have to see as we do load into the game. Now, game number one between Gully, Deco, and Avely. Avely, of course, belonging to Team MarineLord, whereas Gully Deco to Team Beastie in this series. And Gully Deco loading in with the English in the south side of the map on the color yellow, and straight away with the Dark Age opening here as the barracks. And on the north side of the map, we have Avely on the blue Chinese. What do you think of this barracks here, Valdemar?
Well, it's fun because we just talked about it, right? You just talked about how the meta developed. It used to be this, maybe a Dark Age Man at Arms rush. And now we're actually seeing it revived. The English Men at Arms rush, really, really good at denying those early resources, denying gold, potentially. Making it so that for the Chinese player, they'll be forced into playing units, which might be a good thing for the English now. Instead of going for the Song Dynasty, the double A job, where you get the Barbican defense and you get the Imperial Academy, you might now be forced to fully rely on your attacks for the first few minutes of the game. And this might open up for a very, very aggressive game where he can build up on the men at arms, he can follow up with either King or the longbows usually, and then he'll be able to really pin Avely into his base. And that's a tough position to play from. The good thing, though, is the spawn for Avely. So if you look at the spawn, he's got that wood in the back. He's got that mill position to the back as well. And so if the longbows come around, they do have to take the risk of going all the way behind the Chinese base.
And that would be just so significant, won't it? We just know it. Historically, we have seen this time and time again of specifically the English longbow aggression supported by spears and men at arms. And one of the reasons it has fallen out of the meta recently, I would say, in the past year, notably, is specifically because of the possibility of wood lines like this, right? Where for an absolutely minuscule wood investment in the north, you can completely cut off one point of entry towards the wood line, making it so much more difficult for those longbows to find any kind of damage and deny you the crucial wood resource. Because ultimately, if you are able to access wood, then it makes the defense a little bit easier for the opponent's side, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We do see here how the Chinese villagers are now being pushed away from the gold here, now trying to gather that a little bit extra gold, not just for the HA, but also the 35 gold needed for the Imperial official is crucial for the rest of this game here. If you didn't get that extra 35 gold that we see in the bank now for Abely, what would happen is he would be stuck with no gold for the rest of the game because he would simply not be able to attain any gold from the taxes. He needs the 35 gold to produce the official out of the Imperial Academy, which just dropped here. Now, collecting the wood, he will maybe be able to lean into some production units, some production buildings, getting some units out to potentially counter the man-at-arm here. Again, it's a good thing here that Gully didn't over-invest into the man-at-arms because you are really not going to find much more value here. What's most important for Gully is that the follow-up happens sharply. He has to be really, really fast with the H-up, and we can see that he's already got the resources now to H-up. He had 3 minutes and 10 seconds. So solid macro. I think that he might actually be able to pull this off, don't you think?
Put off is certainly a possibility, right? I mean, there's no access to gold for China at this moment at all, besides those taxes, like you mentioned. And, more inquisitive viewers might think, well, historically, man at arms rush isn't, as effective against a civilization like China as it would be against others due to that taxation itself. But keep in mind, taxes can only do so much for you in terms of gold. And that early game where you need not only economic upgrades potentially, but also blacksmith upgrades, as well as the Imperial officials discounted from the Imperial Academy, which is now being highlighted to us. That is still a lot of gold that you require, and taxes can only cover so much of it, right? So, as you said, if that aggression is very well and pointed in its direction, as Goidaka will no doubt attempt here, then we might not see any more gold gathering for Avery this game at all, potentially.
That's true. Now we got to remember what resources give the most amount of gold. Well, it's wood and food, and right, we've got those resources covered. They aren't really something you can deny early on as the English. Although, if the longbows do come around, that is something that we could look into here. Already 100 gold stacked up in the mill, and we're going to see a lot of gold dropped off as tax on the lumber camp as well. So it's really important to remember that it can potentially lead up to being thousands of gold very early into the game, like 11, 12 minutes into the game. Those taxes rack up, and you will see maybe 1 to 2K already at that stage of the game, and that is very important, right? You need your upgrades, right? You need your eco upgrades and your blacksmith upgrades to be able to deal with the longbows with their extra ranged attack. They can do so much damage. Now, the horseman coming out, going to be able to chase that man at arm all the way back to the base, which means now Golly Deckle has to do a spear counter here, and that's going to slow him down.
And this is the optimal approach here by Avely, isn't it? I mean, whenever you face this type of longbow aggression from the English, you have to get those horsemen out immediately, right? Not only will they give you the map control to see exactly where and how the longbows are moving, as long as you pair the horsemen with this scout, of course, which will have extra line of sight within the Tang dynasty for the Chinese, notably. But it will also allow you to pick off the reinforcements of those longbows as long as they are unprotected by spears. And as you said just yourself, Valdemar, here we see the spears being added already. Of course, Gully already having the barracks from the Dark Age at this point in time, and longbows are following suit. But this is the power of the horseman, right? If realistically, Deco cannot move out at this point in time just yet until he has enough of a decent squadron of units that can actually protect itself against someone of a massive horseman in this case. And natural follow-up for Avely is, of course, the archery range.
Absolutely, and you gotta go archers here. You are really only gonna make horsemen to force out enemy spearmen, since the enemy needs spearmen to deter your horsemen to deal with your longbows. And so it's a game of counters, right? You got that counter triangle. The archers countering the spears, spears countering the horsemen countering the archers. And now Avely can hop into the archers and potentially now fully counter all of the units that Gully can put out, whether that's men-at-arms, spears, longbows. Archer's got it all going. So if you're thinking, why is the Chinese player not going for the Shukanus? Well, first of all, we can't. We haven't gotten the Barbican, and it's unlock. We need to get the Barbican. We have to be in Song Dynasty. But the Archer's also faster, and it really just gives so much potential here for a more faster-paced game for the Chinese to not play Shukanus, but to hop into the Archers instead. Now, here, chasing back the scout, denying that vision is so important here. Is Avely going to go archers? Is he going to go horsemen? Is he going to get his upgrades early? And those are all questions that Gully is asking, and I think he did get his answers, although, and that's quite important here.
Without a doubt, right? You need to know exactly what the opponent is doing as English in this situation. So access to your scout is crucial because the way they respond will heavily influence the way you respond then in turn, right? I mean, if Avely would be doubling down on the horseman, then more spears would be needed, whereas with a higher mass of archers, then potentially high focus on longbows as well as men-at-arms would be needed for Gully Deckle in this case. So it is absolutely paramount to keep that scout alive and kicking as the English, also in order to enable you to find the type of damage on the wood line that you would seek as the English in this kind of a case. But we have seen the resources stack up for Avely, and Barbican is going up now. With only 3 villages, it's scouted out by Gully. He could potentially seek to press the matter here, but the archer count for Avely is not looking bad at all. So I don't think he'll be able to stop this Barbican at this point in time just yet. It looks like no, he's forced to back off. The archers are on the chase now.
We've got the horseman and the scout on the left side here, able to track the movement of the English player, and with those extra mobility on the archers for the Chinese here compared to the longbows, they would have been able to chase them all the way back to the base, but luckily they just do that on their own. So Avely sitting quite comfortably here, now getting Song, now getting all the tax he needs, doesn't even need to really gather much gold either, because he's got multiple officials gathering that gold. So now he can choose, is he going to go for pro scouts, is he going to go fast castle right away, since he might already have the food he needs, and from there on out, he can choose what direction to take this game. It's quite tough position to play for Gully at this moment because he hasn't got the firepower, he hasn't got the unit count to really push the case right now. It's difficult for him in this situation, but for Gully, he's going to have to do something no matter what. He hasn't got that scalability going. The only thing he's got going for him is the farming.
Completely correct. And this just shows to what we mentioned earlier in this matchup, right? Just how difficult it can be in some cases to get the type of damage that you need to get done with English when going for this type of aggressive playstyle, right? Part of it was that woodline that we highlighted as the horsemen catch the villager mid-walling there and do pick him off just in time. Very well played there by able to spot that catch. As we were saying, with that woodline so protectable, although the gold is exposed, it's tough to find the damage done, and using that supervision, of course, from the Imperial officials to get that unit count up early for Avely allowed him to drop the Barbican safely. And as you predicted, Valdemar, here we do have the pro scouts beginning.
I just love that pro scout play. It's so methodical. It's so MarineLord, essentially, right? You're thinking about a player. He's doing things step by step. He's looking at the game. We got to defend first. Got to control the situation. Then we go Song Dynasty. Then we get the pro scouts, and now things are moving. The economy is really kicking off, right? We got the tax coming in. We got the extra added food coming in from the drop-offs with those officials, and it's really just what the entire economy is centered around. Is that extra 20% of resources being dropped off here at that mill, protected by the Barbican. It's a beautiful base layout here, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. You see, there's a nice big area for the Imperial Academy there, and its influence zone to place buildings for that extra taxation, as we highlighted. We do have a move out here by Gully again, almost picks off one of the horsemen, but doesn't manage to do so quite yet, unfortunately. But this is all spotted by Averly, of course, with that extra vision on the scout, as we highlighted. And the tower is going to be attempted there onto that forward goal there for Gully Decor. What do you think of this, Valdemar? Seems a little bit delayed potentially for this type of a play, especially being scouted like this potentially.
Yeah, it's tough, right? You want to think about how you're gonna do some damage here, and you've got this big Barbican. Trying to get around that is going to be super difficult. But on top of that, your comp is also 1/3 spearmen. You have 12 spears and 22 longbows, and your opponent's running full archers. If they decide to continue to make archers, you're going to be stuck with a unit that doesn't really do much besides acting as a meat shield. And so it's a difficult position to play. As Gully Deckle, I would say you want to try to find an angle, but there are no angles because the Barbican is a circular defense.
Yes, absolutely. And what Gully does have going for him in this case is, of course, that initial lead on the Steeled Arrow. But as we highlighted before, the supervision from the Imperial officials will allow Avery to not only catch up to that, but also exceed him now, as he will get his Iron Undermesh before Gully Deckle in this case. We'll have to see whether that makes a difference in the actual engagement as to whether Gully goes in before he has his own Undermesh or not. But as you highlighted, it's just so tough in this spot, isn't it? Where exactly do you strike? You have a Barbican protecting the gold. The wood line is way behind it, where the villagers are allowing Avery to build up that infrastructure and archer count. And sure, you might get a few pokes here, and it does seem to be the case. 2 villages picked up for Gully, not bad at all, as he now looks to stutter step his way backwards with the longbows, not taking too much damage and taking some decent trades. The network of castles aura providing that plus 10% attack speed here for the English is crucial as the spears move in, just to tank a little bit for those archers and get them to back off.
Back and forth movement here. We see how that mobility plays such a big role for the archers versus the longbows. Able to catch up here and find the damage. Now, fortunately for Gully Deckle, he's got his longbows positioned around that tower. And if we have to remember, right, the tower gives us that networks of castles, that network of citadels later once it's upgraded, and that's so important. That extra attack speed, is it 20% still? I believe it is. Myriad. You have to follow me up on this. 20% attack speed, super important for that defense. You want to keep your units together. You want your opponent to attack you, but how are you going to force that in this position? That's the hardest part.
Yes, absolutely. I do believe that Network of Citadels upgrade itself takes the bonus from 10% to 20% after the latest nerf, I believe, as it used to be 50% up to 30, but now 10 to 20, if I'm not mistaken. Do correct me on that, admin, if that is so, but I think that's correct. But as you said, that technology innate bonus of the English is absolutely crucial, right? It is what allows their army to shine in these type of direct head-on engagement, as opposed to some other civilizations that might not have access to this flat boost to their fighting prowess, right? And historically, it has been what makes English extremely notable, as well as their enclosures in the Imperial Age, of course.
We see now multiple towers being constructed on the field now, one here at the board, but also these horsemen being so terribly annoying for Gully because his units are so slow. He won't be able to just stream units out of his base like he would do normally. Now that there's a cavalry mass running around the base with their superior mobility, it's pretty much impossible without pulling your army back to get new units to the front line. And so if you were to try to pin your opponent to the base, you're not going to be doing that if you also want to get new units to the front. Eventually, if he doesn't get his units to the front line, the ones that are in his base for Gully, it's pretty much going to be one of those circular movements where you end up creating a fork, and then you got the horsemen cutting off the reinforcements, archers catch up, all of a sudden the English units are too slow and you lose your army. And that's what's going to be so difficult here. Now the astronomical clock tower coming in for Avely, and that's pretty insane, I would say. Already getting that out. That's a massive advantage here, considering Gully is still making farms. He's nowhere near close to getting Castle Age, and now Avely is racing to Castle Age with that extra build speed on the villages. 9 villages, the equivalent of 18 villages now heading up, upgrading those archers, and potentially going for a strike here.
I couldn't agree with you more, Valdemar. It's looking a little bit dire for Golidek in the situation, right? We do have an engage here onto the horseman, caught out of position by the entirety of Golidek's army mass, so most of them will be cleaned up. Very nice pickup here for Golidek, but ultimately, this is only horsemen, right? It's not exactly a unit that Avery will look to rely on too heavily, especially going now into the castle age. You can see just how absolutely incredible that Chinese economy can be once it's set up and defensible, right? The extra supervision from the imperial officials, the professional scouts with the data that have been gathered under the safety of that Barbican allows Avely to not only match the army mass of Golideko, but also stockpile enough for a castle age behind it. As we can see, missing no beat Avely is as all of the upgrades start coming in for the archers. We see the level 2 steeled arrow in as well. Now under mesh level 2 on the way as well here. And Avely might look to make a push here before Galideko can realistically age up. Now, the longbow count is looking very healthy for him. Equal number of longbows and archers is not exactly what you want as the archer player, especially when being forced to run away like this. But when the upgrades kicks in, which will be exactly this very second, Avely will look to force the issue, no doubt.
Yeah, that's the tough part, right? Both of these units are unarmored, so even though they have a high base damage, they can potentially lose out even if they're castle age units. The Chinese archers so strong, but if Gully actually wants to take a fight here and he's got the attack speed, he might be able to come out on top. So I wouldn't just yet say that this is going to be a win for Avely, even though he's got the castle age advantage here. He's got a front line too, and those longbows under the network of castle. And so it's going to be a close one here. It's not going to be super convincing.
Exactly right, and that aura will play a big favor here for Galideko, right? His units might be a little bit weaker due to a tech disadvantage here, but the extra attack speed, range, as well as damage on the longbows is what's going to allow him to potentially trade at least even here as opposed to unfavorably as he looks to kite towards the edge of the map here, which is a good move, I would say. You want to stop that mass from getting straight to your base, and as long as you keep kiting effectively, you can still get pretty decent value out of these engagements here, as we do see the longbow mass is starting to fall, however, and Gully is now stuck in a really difficult position, right? We have seen this often, where do you keep massing units to try to protect your base, or do you actually age up so that this tech disparity doesn't get too severe? And it often feels like in these situations, Valdemar, either answer is potentially wrong.
Yeah, it feels like the game is already lost before you can really make that decision. The opponent's got you pinned with that Castle Age coming in, and now with those extra armored units, the extra damage on your existing units, and that extra movement speed on the archers in the first place, able to now completely wipe that longbow mass on the right side of the map. Now Gully's stuck in the Feudal Age, trying to defend against a Castle Age opponent, and that's been Castle Age for a while now, getting a bunch of the most important upgrades, such as +2 ranged armor, +2 ranged attack, completely nullifying the man-at-arms role here as a meat shield, and the damage that comes out from the longbow is also fully negated by the +2 ranged armor. So the position for Gully is possibly White Tower. I don't know. What do you think?
I think White Tower might have to be it, not so much because of the extra boosted production that players so much enjoy, but purely as a measure of survival in this case, right? There's doubling now the army count of Gully Avely as with his Chinese. So many archers here, and now many knights on the field as well, looking to charge in. Nice little defensible spot here for Gully behind the tower and the house. It could look to make a difference in this defense for him, but the tech advantage is so starkly obvious. You can see those men-at-arms getting absolutely pincushioned by those archers and dying very quickly as a result of it. Very few spears are left here for Gully Deco, where to the point where there's in fact quadruple the count of knights to spears, which is definitely not what you want, especially an age behind. Longbows seek to make a desperate defense here on their last legs towards the town center of Gully Deco, but it's only looking worse and worse at this point in time. Another knight goes down for Avely there, but now archers are splitting off towards in separate directions within the base of Gully Deco, on some onto the wood line, now back towards the farms. It's a very desperate defense in this case, Valdemar.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a tough one, right? Because your opponent's out on the map, they've got access to those high gather rate resources, and while you're just stuck trying to defend your whole economy with your vills, with the short bows coming out here, trying to defend against knights and veteran archers, it's horrible when your full farm economy is full denied. And I would be pretty safe to say this game is looking so grim for Gully that he might as well just go next and not tire himself out more than just necessary here. Now, when we think about this match and we think about how Chinese plays into English, it played out like we thought it would. It played out with that extra mobility now, and it's such a difficult thing to deal with. Once you lost that first fight, which was what Gully has here, it's such a impossible position to play, and now he's just stuck trying to defend against these Castle Age units.
Absolutely right. The entirety of the English strategy like this, playing for the Council Hall, as the game does end here 1-0 in favor of Averley. But as we were saying, it's so difficult with English when playing this kind of a strategy, right? You are so reliant on getting some damage done and, leading in terms of tempo on your opponent with trying to dictate in what direction the game goes from then on. And if you're unable to find that kind of damage and potential within the game, then really, due to your slightly the weaker economy of English earlier in the game before you get that farm set up, and of course later in Imperial Age when it really starts to pick up due to the enclosures. Before that, however, English has one of the slowest economies in the game, right? So if you spend most of your starting resources on this kind of aggression and are unable to capitalize on it, as we saw, you are left in a very, very difficult position where you end up falling behind the opponent naturally without even taking that much damage.
Yeah, and that's the thing a lot of people get wrong, right? You don't need to go to town center to get an economic advantage. And it's really also why the Chinese is such a strong civilization. You can play narrow, you can get those two landmarks going in the feudal age, activating the Song dynasty. And as we can see on the economy count here in the bottom right, about that 10-minute mark, the Barbican comes through. A few raids happen on the economy of Gully Deckel, and all of a sudden, it just keeps adding up. It adds up as the natural villager production for the Chinese is increased, the villager disparity increases as well because the English has got nothing like it. They haven't got an increased villager production. They've got the farms, but with pro scouts, Chinese doesn't need to get out of their base anyways.
Completely correct. And it's not even only the villager count increase from Song Dynasty allowing the Chinese to produce villagers faster, it's also those imperial officials, the extra taxation influence from the Imperial Academy. All of this results in a snowballing effect in terms of economy for the Chinese compared to the slow paced nature of the English economy. And the result of which we can see here, right? Not only did Averley managed to completely even out the army counts within that mid to late feudal. But on top of it, he's able to stack the resources for a castle age as well, Valdemar, due to those pro
Mm-hmm.
scouts, right? So it's very, very difficult from then on for English if you are caught with your pants down, so to say, an age below. How exactly do you follow up more units, or do you just take up and risk the gamble of potentially getting pushed
Yeah,
in? It's very, very tough.
it's extremely tough, and I do probably want to just give Gully a little bit of credit as well, right? He did play a very aggressive strategy from the get go, but he was really also stuck with an insanely good spawn for his opponent. The wood was in the back, the food was naturally in the back as well with the mill placement, and it's just impossible to get behind someone's base on such a narrow map like this. You've got no room to move. And so if your opponent's blessed with a nice spawn that allows them to play more defensive and does not like a frontwood spawn where you might get pushed from side to side, well, then it's also a little bit more difficult than it was in the first place getting to play against somebody who has more tournament experience like Avely.
Well said, absolutely right. It's very difficult as a result of that. It's so much of it is decided by the spawn, specifically for English here, right? I mean, there could be some potential plays where you try to feign the opponent with only some units when you see that you can't get much
Hmm.
damage with a spawn. But obviously, with a player like MarineLord behind Avely, that's something he will be able to read and assess incredibly effectively, telling Avely straight away, right,
Hmm.
that it might be a fake out. So it's so tough as a result of that. And it's one of the reasons we have seen this strategy fall out of the favor somewhat within the last year, right? But at a point, I think it was looking not too bad for Gorydeco in that sort of mid feudal age. He did have a lot of farms going up for him, right?
Hmm.
Which is slow initially, but ultimately, when those days start running out for China, it could really, really play in his favor and allow him to use his superior food income at that point in time until China gets their granary farm transition going to retake that map control to potentially force a good fight from where he will have a numbers advantage. But it's all reliant on getting up to that cast stage
Mm.
safely, right? So when Avery read his window to completely prevent that, it was very difficult from Gully from then on. Yes.
Yeah, and it's so important, right? You're playing tournament games. It's important that you got that execution, that you got that timing in mind, because you can make the investments for the later game, but if you never get to the late game, it's never going to matter anyways. And so you look at something like a farming placement, full farm setup. You got those 24 farms around 3 mils. We usually call that, a really, really good position to play from the English. But what does it matter if your opponent's getting 1,000 more resources per minute just because of other bonuses, right? And you got to get to a point, which might be the Castle Age or the Imperial Age, where your opponent's starting to starve for food and they are stuck trying to make their own farm transition. You're good to go, but you're never getting to that point. And that's the problem, right? You want to set yourself up for the mid-late game, but you also want to keep yourself alive until then.
That can often be the difficult part in for English in a lot of these situations, right? When finding themselves so out-tempoed economically, especially by a slightly faster civilization, so to say, as China often is. But I'm kind of curious about what we're going to have for our next matchup. I'm not exactly sure if it is in fact Dry Arabia that is the next map. That is the picture that we have here. Of course, the civilizations are yet unpicked. I'm not exactly sure. But now Golideko is finding himself a game behind in this play all five set, right? I do wonder, especially what sort of words of encouragement and advice Beasty is giving him at this point in time. Something we'll just have to potentially speculate on. But we do have our matchup coming in here: English
That's
against
spicy.
Malians. Yeah.
That's a tough one, right? It's not an even matchup historically. We've always talked about English versus Malians being one of those matchups that is just so unfavored for the English. We might yet see another matchup loss here on paper. Gotta remember though, with a better drafting, odds also increase, but still, we gotta remember that we've got 8 eyes playing this game right now. We've got 2 players on either side. And so for the Malians, you got to stay alive. Maybe you have to survive against some early aggression, or maybe you got to play the long game. We could potentially see quite the long game here. Now, for the English, now they got to stay alive if they go 2DC, because they got to get to Castle Age, got to get the White Tower going, because of that massive cow boom that we always talk about. That increase in food is so, so strong. And so this matchup is it's tough for English because you can't do much. But if you survive and you make it to the late game, you're usually good to go.
And I think I'm personally extremely excited to see this matchup because of a lot of the points that you highlighted, right? Malians in particular, I find adds a very unique dynamic to a lot of games that they're present in because there's ultimately really two main ways that you can respond to Malians as a civilization. Either you try to severely outboom them before that cattle ranch cow boom with the Fulani Corral comes in and that food income just skyrockets for them, right? You seek to set up an economic leads, your defenses properly in your base in order to defend against that onslaught of units that will be coming towards you, whilst hopefully not giving up too much map control. And then you have the other camp of playing against the Malians, where you seek to go aggression with no limit, right? Essentially, you seek to completely choke them off of their gold, prevent that second pit mine from going up essentially ever, if possible, and just kill them in their crib before the cows can even get set up properly, right? And I'm particularly curious what we will see going into this game, as English can historically play either of those approaches, right? As we have in the north side of the map, Averley spawning in as the English in the color blue for Team MarineLord, and in the south side of the map, towards the eastern corner, we have Gully Deco playing as the yellow Malians for Team Beasty.
A tough set to get into for Gully now, the second game of this play all five. He's going to be stuck a game behind Avely here, but he has the preferable matchup. The side of this matchup, Malians versus the English, usually feels pretty good here. And with the spawn he's got, he might be able to pull something off should Avely try to pin him down here early. Although we see no dog age aggression, we see a very greedy opening here for the Malians. Getting the classic 6 houses out, it's going to be pretty chill. Not much special going on here in the early game. I would suspect that we're going to be seeing perhaps a little bit more of a slow approach from the English. What do you think?
That's quite possible, right? I mean, you mentioned yourself, there's no Dark Age opening here for Averley, which I do think historically can be something quite difficult to pull off for English in this matchup due to those really, really expensive cost of those men-at-arms, right? And ultimately, there's only so much damage you can really do to the Pitmine as opposed to a civilization with access to spears in the Dark Age. But yes, I mean, in terms of spawn, it's difficult. I mean, we have the back goal there for Avery, so something like a second Townsend is something that he might look to go into with that safe spawn, right? Because we have seen in the past that Malians do tend to go, can go at least, on the aggressive side when the opponent does opt for the economic play, using the Javelin's increased ranged armor in order to help them tank TC fire and deal some counter damage done in turn. But that would make it much more difficult with that gold spawn for Avely, whereas for Gully Deku, we do have a very nice secondary gold mine in the back of his base, protected by the large northern wood line, where he might look to drop his second pit mine. But it is in fact a double farm opening here for Avely, which I must say, considering it is looking like he's going for a second town center here, I find rather curious, Valdemar.
I'm not quite sure on the maths here, but should he have gone for those two farms, it means that he might have to go into a lumber camp as well. I don't remember though, but let's see
Yeah.
if he's gonna be stuck trying to also gather lumber from the woodline as opposed to just gathering from the straggler trees, as we usually see that fast second town center opening, getting close to the 5 minute mark. It might get a little bit delayed here, and we do see that lumber camp coming through here. The early farms do delay the amount of food you consume from the sheep, and so that's a really good opening if you want to extend the amount of time you can scout. But really, do we need it? I'm not sure. I would personally say we don't if we want to maybe get a second town center quicker. But hell, what do I know? We are watching Ably versus Scully Deckle coached by MarineLord and Beastyqt, so I'm curious to see where they're taking this.
Yes, I must agree with you. It's definitely a little bit strange, and I'm trying to sort of understand the possible reasoning behind it, because as you mentioned yourself, and as we know, right, you are forced to go for that lumber camp when going for these starting farms. I believe you can get away with one, but then you will have to long distance mine wood for your lumber camp if you do choose to do so, but that is not the case here, right? Now, it could be to extend the sheep lifespan, as you mentioned, but I'm not sure how necessary that would be in this matchup. However, we'll just have to see how it plays out. Realistically, unless Gully does decide to go for some really fast javelin aggression here, or potentially with sofas as well, although that's much less likely, it shouldn't make too big of a difference here for Avery, right? He will still get that second town center up, most likely wherever he chooses. Really, it might be delayed by just a few several seconds potentially, but it shouldn't make too big of an impact. As now we see barracks being dropped here by Gully Deco, in anticipation of the king, undoubtedly, which will be coming out from the Abbey of Kings within the next minute.
Yeah, within the next minute, so we still got at least 40 seconds here from the H up until he's got the king out, another maybe 30 seconds across the map, so he's got time. Gully Deckle has got the time to get the Malian cow boom up and going, maybe going for that second pit mine as we see here. It's a really good play with that extra time you have while your opponent is getting a second town center. You can afford to go for a little bit of extra greed as well, and then go for those extra economy upgrades. We see double broadaxe coming through, we see the horticulture upgrade coming through, so wood and food gathering is getting boosted here. That's important, right? Because you want to really, what we say, utilize that extra time you have to also greed out. Because the more you greed out here in the early game, the more intense, the more powerful your cow boom will eventually be, because you're able to push out so many more units if they have those added upgrades on top.
Well said indeed. And we do see that second town center there for Avely
Ooh, I love that.
on the deer, of course. And this is, I've seen this very commonly from MarineLord in this matchup in particular when he's playing the English, right? So definitely we can see his influence there. It is a much more much more difficult position to defend when it does come to that castle age timing for the English. However, the additional food from those deer can play a vital role in the defense when it does come to it, right? So we'll have to see whether Avely is able to put on a defensive masterpiece, as he will likely have to in order to defend that position, likely with a coaching of MarineLord helping him out, of course, or whether it's something that will ultimately really come to bite him in the future. That's only to be seen. Now, we do see the second pit mine here for Gully Deco being set up in the south side as opposed to the back, which is a little bit of a curious decision, and as it is closer and safer to set it up in the back there. But he could have potentially also opted to go for one of the larger gold mines to further boost his gold income. I guess there is at least a little bit of worry of more extended feudal play here from the English, and if you ever do lose that, that is a very difficult spot to be in, with already two town centers scaling for the English behind it.
Yeah, and it's that scaling that's so important, right? We saw it how the farm set up last game. It ended up costing us quite a lot of time, and we weren't able to keep up as the English. But now, going for that deer with that second town center on the deer, collecting the gold from that position as well, we are able to get up to the castle age a lot quicker than we would have been if we were to also get a full farm transition at the same time. And so, even though there are farms getting added, and we have those extra sheep on the TC, the extra deer income, which is faster at this point in the game, will allow us to go castle not only quicker, but also allow us to make units should we need to get some of those for defense or offense.
That's absolutely right. And I do expect that we will potentially be seeing at least some units here from Averley in the feudal age, most likely to help defend initially against that castle age onslaught. As I know, that is something MarineLord particularly seems to do often in this matchup. And of course, MarineLord is in fact coaching Averley, so it's something he'll direct him towards undoubtedly. But there is a possibility we will see a direct zoom towards castle age from Averley, but with those economic upgrades being picked up already, I'm not sure exactly that will be the case. Not too many on wood so far for him, so I could potentially be mistaken, but we will have to see. Still, more speed is being added by Garidako's Malians at this point in time, which I must say might be a little bit of an overkill, Valdemar, for dealing with only one king, right?
Yeah, and that's why he's not adding in units. That's why Averley is sticking to that one king. Because that one king, which was essentially free, which came out so late, has still forced out not only notch range, also a barrack, a delay on the pit mine, and an additional 6 donzos as well. The value on this king is so high that just adding in more units at this stage would only decrease that value. And so the position that Averley is playing from, with free map control, with that one cavalry unit just pinning the Malians to their base as they try to reach out for the second pit mine, it is so, so strong to get into. And as our observer here correctly points out, yeah, that one king might actually allow Averley to go for the King's Palace as well. Setting up a third town center speeds up his ticket to getting the victory here with that extra economy versus the Malian economy, which is the victory condition here. It is getting an added economy advantage versus the Malians that will allow you to pump more units and exceed the Malian swarm.
Yes, absolutely right. That is, in fact, the win condition. And it does seem to be not what Averley opts for in this game, going instead for the White Tower, which I do think is the slightly more prudent, safer play, right? You don't necessarily want to risk throwing away the ability that you already have, potentially for getting even more, right? Ultimately, the Fulani Corral is still quite an oppressive landmark to deal with in terms of food income in that castle list. So Averley playing a little bit safe in this situation, which I do think is the prudent choice, right? We've already got damage, like you mentioned, Valdemar from the king. We got an excessive unit investment from Golideko, even picking up a villager kill, which is not the spot you want to be in. However, the White Tower does get discovered here by a small battalion of Galideko's army. The Donzos, as well as the Javelin throwers, moving in. One village already down, two, make it three now, four now down for Averley as some of that economic lead is being cut off. And it seems like the landmark might actually be denied at this point in time. Quite the placement that Averley didn't expect, it seems.
Yeah, it's not necessarily going to be a deny. I do doubt that. That would be such a big throwaway here for the landmark. Got to use those villager short bows and that king to effectively deal with these donzos. But what's really, really well positioned here from Gully, and I got to give him credit for this, is how he's positioned those donzos. They are actually not in range of the second town center. The second town center, a long time ago, got its range reduced, and so it's actually not able to defend this white tower. And I don't think it's something that Averley and Marino really thought too much about here, this counter attack and that positioning. Had he moved it 2 tiles closer to that TC, this would not have been a problem. The TC would have been able to defend the white tower, and there would have been a castle age for Averley right now, but he's simply just stuck here, losing out on economy, losing out on villagers, and their resource collection. This position is tough, and he's had to go into men at arms to just deal with it.
And Gunny needed something like this in this spot, right? As you said yourself, the landmark will, of course, not be denied. However, the amount of delay and value that Gully got out of those few units almost, if not fully, counteracts the damage and value that the king got for Averley, right? So much idle time caused several villager kills, and this is actually really, really good for Gully because ultimately those units there were not really going to be part of his main composition, right? Especially Donzo's most likely are not going to be part of his main composition as we see a priority into sofas now, as well as more javelins and Musafadis being added. Whereas Averley's going for the classic, of course, the spearman combination with the crossbowman. Such a powerful composition even now in AoE 4. And those will definitely do a good job of dealing with the sofas. Less so with the Musafadis, however, in a defensive position, the Musafadis really can only shine if they get a notable surround. And until we get to those kind of army counts, it will be a while.
Or maybe not. We have to remember Gully did get up to Castle Age in the meantime and was able to get up to Castle at the same time as Avely was. And so even though it looks like he's behind in economy, he's got another 20 cows as well, booming away, got that food income going. So 1,000 food coming in for both of them. Gully with 800 wood and 400, 500 more gold per minute. Gully is actually getting way more resources than Avely is, despite the extra villages for Avely. And so the position is pretty good for Gully. He's got the enemy's main TC. The main is completely undefended. There's no white tower. It's only the second town center. And so if he plays it out correctly, if he's able to not take too much damage on his raiding parties, he might be able to actually really get some damage out here, as long as Avely is not full wall, and which he has not started a single one yet.
Very well said indeed, and those walls will play quite a significant part in this matchup, without a doubt. Right, once those sofa numbers count, the sofa number count gets up to a very dangerous levels. The raiding around the flanks, with that white tower only being in the center between the two town centers on the wood line, all of the farms on the outskirts will start to be exposed, and ultimately against such high armor that the sofas can get with their imported armor upgrade, as well as of course the blacksmith upgrades, those TC arrows will only tickle them, and they'll be able to dive with impunity. Able to go out on the map control to pick up the relics, and how much
One of the main strengths of Malians, and also one of the main weaknesses for English, their infantry being notoriously slow. And so if you're caught off guard, you might just get completely wiped out, like we saw in the previous game, Chinese versus English. Now we see some fighting here happening in the base. That good raiding party coming around. Two sofas causing a lot of damage here. And now on the left side here as well, we've got Avely chasing away. I would assume that's also some knights or some Musafadis here on the left side. But nonetheless, this is good idle time, and it's all about that at this stage of the game. It's about creating those small advantages, getting ahead in the tempo, and then eventually causing to a build-up that will give you the opportunity to go for a winning strike here. And so you can do that with Musafadi and Sofas pretty much exclusively.
Without a doubt. And we are aware of sound issues now affecting the stream. Do bear with us as we attempt to fix that. It shouldn't be too long. Give us several moments here. Of course, the game will continue to be cast. Meanwhile, we have a dive now onto the wood line from Gully. Now, the white tower is in the north side of Avely's base, so this left-hand side of the wood line is completely exposed, right? And Gully has free reign to dive repeatedly on there if he so wishes. As the army count for Avely is starting to build now, there's a decent number of crossbowmen and spearmen on the field, but ultimately, you know, they are infantry units, right? And quite slow ones at that, especially the crossbowmen. So if Gully is able to really utilize the mobility of the Musafadis as well as the Sofas to his advantage here, he can have those units running circles around repeatedly in Avely's base, not really being able to defend any one spot effectively unless Avely splits them. But then you could potentially fall into the trap of one of your split groups being surrounded and wiped out, of course, as now Avely quite prudently does decide to go for those walls, which he will need to be able to defend effectively, without a doubt.
Absolutely. We see the walls coming up, and that's going to be so important when it comes to the defense here. It's not a lot of map control, and it's a very potent ball that he's got to defend with, the crossbows and the spearmen, but what else has he got besides that? Not a lot. He needs to get going. We see Gully is expanding to the middle. He's got that big pit mine here in the middle, fully covered with houses. He's got his army, Musafadi warriors and Sofas defending it. And they've got that mobility, so they're able to quickly move around the English army. Now, what is the victory condition here for the English, do you think, Myriad?
It will definitely be securing more map control, specifically that gold in the north there. Ultimately, the gold within Avery's base will run out, right? There's no doubt about that, as the game does tend to go on. So you have to very, very carefully expand your zone of influence as the English in this regard, without exposing too much of your economy and going up ultimately to that imperial age. And I think that spot in the north for Avery is absolutely crucial to secure, because not only do you have the big gold, like I mentioned, but also the sacred site, right? Quite commonly, we see Malians opting for the sacred site as a victory condition in this matchup, and against something like China as well, which is also very defensive, because you can only do so much damage in the base favorably, right? You can't really take a full pitched fight within the opponent's defensible base, especially against English. So going for that sacred site victory condition is quite common. Whereas if Avery does correctly, as he looks to do, secure that position in the north, then that will make it much more difficult to gully deco, and then he can proceed to potentially go up to the Imperial Age and play the game from then on his terms.
Absolutely, and again, it is a tough spot right now for the English. They've got that decreased income compared to the Malians, lower gold, lower food income, although it is slowly evening out here. The longer the game goes, the increased village count for the English two-town center will supersede the Malian boom. But there's a long way to go until that, and it looks like Golly's just looking to really mass up a lot of units here and potentially go for a winning strike. He's almost got 100 units, 85 currently versus Avely's 43, being pretty much only spears and crossbows. Now, the problem here might be that he's running 50 Musafadi warriors versus the opponent's split comp being also ranged and melee. And so if the defense is really executed well here, he might be stuck behind buildings, and that might turn out into Avely's favor.
Yes, absolutely. Musafadi are a very, very effective unit, especially roaming around open plains on the map and looking to get surrounds, especially utilizing their stealth. But within an English base, on the network of castles, potentially citadels now, if we have it in, I'm not sure yet. Maybe we can get confirmation from Cal soon enough, but it makes it so much more difficult, right? And ultimately, Musafadis aren't too ineffective at dealing with crossbows, right? Ultimately, they are ranged units against melee. Of course, Musafadis are unarmored, so they are particularly weak against archers. But crossbows somewhat as well. But the crossbows are very slow and immobile, so an envelopment by the Musafadi does turn the tides extremely quickly. But here's what we spoke about already, right? We have the 3 sacred sites locked in for Gully Deco. His economy is starting to boom quite aggressively, as we can see the income tabs. If they're slightly ahead in food by about 500 food per minute or so, but Gully Deco is way ahead both in terms of wood and in gold, especially more than doubling the gold count at this point in time. So I'll have some men-at-arms here in the south just catching that Imam with the relic out of position there. They might look to potentially get a decap on there, which is something Gully will likely want to avoid. But we have Rams behind this as well, as he looks to try to get some damage done. Realistically, I'm not sure he will be able to get too much damage done, and potentially a full-pitch fight here might be a mistake for Gully. But yeah, with so many archers on the field, it might be just fine for him in the end. We'll see.
Yeah, it's kind of like the base defense. It's pretty much centered around the blockers, the wood line, and the line of sight that it blocks, but also how the production buildings end up becoming your front line when you're running a 20 longbow, 20 crossbow composition here. Now, Musafadi coming in here up against the longbows and the crossbows getting on top. All of the melee units are stuck on the rams currently, and so this is an opportunity for Gully to get on top of the longbows. Gets on top of him, able to do some damage here as well. This could turn out to be a pretty nasty fight for Avely if he plays it out a little bit wrongly here. Musafadi Warriors getting some damage, fully blocked now by the spears and the men-at-arms. It's going to be very, very difficult with the networks of castles, potentially citadels, adding another 20 to 30% attack speed on top of it. So this defense here, it's looking pretty good. He's evening out the numbers. If you look to the middle, top side of your screen right now, you can see that 77 versus 74. Raiding party, a little bit out of position, so not all of the units are present either. That was a pretty tough fight for Gully, and I would say Avely's position is looking promising.
I agree completely, and it's so well refers back to what we mentioned earlier, right, regarding the power of buildings on the defense and the choke areas between them, right, and how difficult it is to traverse them. The Malian army especially is so reliant on getting positional advantages against the opponent's army due to the slightly weaker nature of their units, cost for cost, as opposed to most civilizations. But that's so difficult to do when pushing into an opponent's base like this, and especially against an English opponent, right? right, who are notorious for building their bases very tight and constrained, right? And as we saw, the front line for Avely completely pushing up against Gully Deco's front line to the point where Gully's excessive melee mass gets stuck behind it, and they can only go in single files forward, makes it so difficult for the full damage potential of Gully's army to manifest that way. Now, Avely, feeling a little flush of confidence, is marching slightly towards the front of his base, starting to drop towers to further press his lead and expand his map control carefully, as we also mentioned before, with extended walls coming up on the southern side. But I'm also concerned about him securing the north side of the map instead.
Yeah, it's tough, right? But you got to remember that he's playing it methodical. He's taking that massive ranged blob, that death ball that we usually refer to, and that he's using it to slowly push towards the middle. Now dropping the Berkshire Palace, despite the raid that he's got here on the left side, able now to fully counter the Malian army with the longbows. Dropping the Berkshire here allows him to gather the gold in the middle and provides a corridor for him to push throughout the middle. And that's important because if he doesn't get that position secured, that the White Tower is securing at the top, the Berkshire now securing the bottom, then it's going to be still tough to deal with the Malian raids. Now with the Berkshire up, that's no longer a problem. The crossbows here, defending on the left side, so those sofas are not going to be that big of a deal. And now the sacred sites have not been ticking this entire time. What we saw before was that the sacred sites were neutralized. And so the Gully potentially lost 1 or 2 minutes here as well. He could have been down to half the time, 5 minutes, but now he's stuck on 8 minutes and 20 seconds up against an Imperial Age opponent, floating a bit, but he has the potential to go Imperial here, potentially save what is an economy disadvantage.
Yes, and the Sacred Tiber in particular is something that really must hurt Gully in this position, right? When you do go for this type of a Sacred Site victory condition where you specifically even drop outposts throughout them to prevent any kind of sneaky decap, which all of this is obviously quite a significant resource investment for the Malians or whatever other civilization does go for that Sacred Victory. So when you do get decapped, despite sinking all this attention and resources into it, it really, really dents your possibility for a win condition in that regard ultimately, and makes it so much more unlikely for you to achieve so, because now, as we mentioned, Avely is in the Imperial Age as the English. The Berkshire is towards that gold, so we'll have another small gold mine under his grip in this position, as that will be very difficult for Gully Deco to push, especially with the tech advantage he now finds himself under. Tech disadvantage, excuse me. We'd have a keep dropping there on that center large pit mine, and there's looked to be a pitch fight going here, as we see now. Network of Citadels is in for Avely in this position, as we see further outposts being dropped on the forward, and Gully does know that this is not a fight that he can win with this tech disadvantage, as he is forced on the retreat here. Now he is drawing Avely's army in a more favorable position here, next to the pit miners. They are now taking arrow fire from the keep as well, so Avely potentially overextending here just a little bit. We'll have to see what the Gully turns and does take the fight. We have Mangonel out on the backline as well, which will look to get into position and fire very soon. I do think Gully is retreating just a little bit too much. I think he can take the fight now at this point in time, as he's at risk of being soon denied, but instead he goes for the Fort of the Huntress as well behind all of this.
Yeah, he's trying to get age 4 here. He's trying to upgrade an existing army, which he has plenty of, 118 military units here, but at this tech disadvantage, and now Avely being on top of the actual landmark that allows him to go age 4, that's going to be a big trouble if he's going to have that denied here. Mangonel's coming in clutch here. 2 Mangonels able to disperse the longbows here and push them out to the side, but the longbows, look at that, sniping down the Mangonels as well, so the counter siege rests in the longbow as well. Now with the Fort of the Huntress up, it's going to grant extra attack speed through the stealth for the Musafati warriors. And now on top of that, Avely lost a considerable amount of frontline here, stuck having to go back and now possibly getting completely surrounded here by the sofas and the archers coming on the back line here. So this is a troublesome position. Gully can look to get most of his upgrades. He's got the gold income that he needs for it. But the big problem here is, where is he going to take this next?
We'll have to wait and see, right? As we do see with the split screen of Observer Cal, we have men-at-arms in the southern sacred side as well, now officially decapping it, so no victory condition in terms of sacred sides for Gully Deco remaining in this game. But you mentioned very well, Valdemar, there was a bit of an overextension by Avely within that position there, maybe getting slightly over-eager with the lead that he gained from the earlier fight, as well as his tech lead. Of course, we can still not underestimate the Malian food economy in that situation, as he so did, but ultimately most most of his army does live. The wraparound looked a little bit scary initially there, but we did have the reinforcements from Avery cutting them off to secure the escape route. And find this elite army tactics coming in for Avery as well. So those men-at-arms are going to be a lot more durable and also do a lot more damage, Valdemar.
Yeah, absolutely. We did get that sacred site decapture, and so Gully Deckle, now without a victory condition, playing Imperial Age versus the English, it never feels good, because once you're up against those Imperial Age farms that's granting that extra gold, that's where things get dicey, because you don't need to get as much map control as the English. You get a lot of value out of simply just producing crossbows and men-at-arms. Your men-at-arms and your crossbows cost a lot of food, a little bit of gold, and you get your gold anyways from just farming. So if he is to play a really long game here, both of these economies, yeah, they do have a lot of passive income. And so it's about who can minimize that, who can get around the corners, get into the openings that there might be in each base, and then take out pit mines, take out the farms that might be set up in the English base. Now we see that second town center has been added in for the Malians as well, and that's quite important. You gotta remember that second town center provides the scalability, but it has come in quite late, don't you think?
It has, without a doubt, right? I mean, already we see the top of the economy count, which can be a little bit deceiving due to the cows for the Malians as well, right? It is actually a little bit higher than the number would suggest, as they do not get counted under that villager count at the top. But it is still somewhat lacking for Goideko despite that, right? Especially because now, finding ourselves in Imperial Age, the English farms are more productive than ever before, right, in the previous ages. So that town center should have come in perhaps a little bit earlier. Even trade is not exactly is something that could be on the cards for Gully Deco, although it's slightly would be delayed in this case as well. But as you highlighted, it becomes a bit of a difficult game here for the Malians, right? Because you have this very oppressive, powerful English death ball moving across the map slowly and menacingly, right? Without a doubt, as they go now towards the center, large pit mine, and this is such a big economic focus point for Galideko. Losing this will prove quite crippling for him, without a doubt. But you know, it's very difficult to beat this kind of an army mass, especially for the Malians in a direct fight. It will become a game of cutting off reinforcements, finding raids onto the farms and torching them within the English base. And Gully will need to do this several times repeatedly in order to dwindle that English mass, weaken their economy, because ultimately a full-pitched fight is realistically not something that he can win.
Absolutely not. It's a tough one, right? You wanna find a way out of this, and it's tough. You got the White Tower, you got the Berkshire in the base, they're fully defending, and then you've got that death ball in the middle, and you can't really take it head on because you've got mostly Musafati warriors and archers. And with networks of citadels, as we have pointed out in this game, the previous one, it plays such a big role. And at this stage of the game, you aren't necessarily going to find much value in just taking big fights. And if you can't get into the enemy's base, where do you go next? That's the big question here. And yeah, we're looking to potentially see more of these human wave tactics, as we call them, where you're throwing more units at each other. But the problem is, Gully simply does not have the economy behind it to be able to always produce and lose units at the same time. That's not true for Avery. He is able to do that. He's got the farm set up. He's got the food banked up in his resource bank as well. 4,000 food and 4,000 wooden gold here. So even if he were to lose all his army, he's fine.
Yes, absolutely. The farms are working overtime, right? Whereas for Gully, due to his weaker economy at this stage in the game, any losses here, especially with his slightly weaker army units, will hurt ever more so than before. And as we mentioned, losing this pit mine just hurts so much for him. You can see now in the gold income already. Now the income for Gully is still looking pretty healthy, but the bank is no longer there, right? He's forced to spend so much not only on economic upgrades, but also elite upgrades for his units, as well as blacksmith upgrades and potentially university techs as well. All of this in the Imperial Age costs a tremendous amount of gold, which even for a civilization like the Malians can be tough to afford, especially when finding themselves on the back foot like this. And this type of building damage that Gully has suffered with this pit mine is exactly the kind of damage that he needs to cause to Avery within the confines of his safe base in order to keep retaining a foot within this game. Now we do still have three sacred sites actually again locked in for Garidako, so that will provide slight respite in terms of gold income for him. But Avery's playing this smart, right? Nice and slow, not overextending his lead, sending more men-at-arms now onto the sacred sites to decap. And I'm really interested to see where Gully looks to go next. He prudently adds mangonels here, which will help turn the tide of the battle towards his favor somewhat, but we have already highlighted the strength of those longbows, right, in potentially sniping out those mangonels as engagement does come in here. Mangonels move into position. They seek to deploy the center of the army where they're nice and safe to take off some shots onto the backline. Nice shot with the mangonel onto the left side of the longbow mass as the front line for Avely is getting completely swallowed whole by the Musafadi here, and he is forced to go back towards the position of the outpost. Trebuchet firing off behind it as well, preventing the pitman from going up again. Now the archers are started stepping forward and forward here towards the longbow mass, but new reinforcements of men-at-arms are coming in to block their approach. Sofa's added into the mix as well. Mangonel's redeploying again, another shot fired. Decent connection there, but not too much damage done, as this sort of war of attrition is exactly what tends to favor English in the long run. So although it's looking somewhat favorable for Gully in this position, he can't really sustain this for too long, although the food income is looking healthy for him as well as for Avely, but the longbows are doing just so much damage. The incendiary arrows as well. It's just so much DPS that is being outputted by them. The last of the mangonels does fall now as Gully seeks to hold his position, but he realizes that he is forced to back off ultimately.
Yeah, that was a little bit of an interesting fight. You're looking at a massive bank of resources for Avely, completely consumed now, and he was able to really deplete that Gully in that fight, and now he's able to continuously make units. Avely's stuck making more and more production buildings just to be able to sustain these types of war of attritions that you call it, Myriad. And I think that's the perfect name here. You're really just looking at that type of fighting where the one that can produce the most will win, and you can see the sofas coming in, the archers coming in again on top of this longbow mass, firing incredibly fast with that incendiary arrow upgrade as well, dealing a lot of damage, but also a lot of overkill here. And I think that might end up becoming a bit of a problem here for Avely, since most of his army is firing on singular units.
Yes, without a doubt, some pretty good micro will be necessary in this kind of a situation to get the maximal efficiency out of those longbows, increase damage with the incendiary arrows. I would love to see some hand cannoners or potentially elite crossbows mixed in here for Avely as well, just to help deal better with that Sofa front line, as well as to make it easier on the burden of micro to select those separate groups of longbows to fire off and potentially shift back onto different sides of the archers to get the maximal value. The mangonel almost goes down for Avely, but villagers are pulled just in time to repair it. And of course, the arrows from Galideco's Marlians will not do as much damage to the siege of Avely as his own longbows would, thanks partly to that incendiary arrows as well as the higher base damage that the longbows do have. A little bit of a stalemate now again as both sides retreat back and lick their wounds after that tough engagement once more. But now forward keep draw coming in for Avely to completely deny that gold from Galideco.
Yeah, and that's so important. The Malian income, it's all reliant on that pit mine, and that pit mine in the middle was giving a juicy income, being fully covered with houses. Now the problem here is, Gully has been able to add in more and more villagers. He's got the cows as well, and so he's able to catch up on the gold and food income that Avely has been sitting on with that 120 villager lead for so long. Now Gully is no longer in 80 villas and 20 cows. He's in 106 villas and 20 cows, able to now get that similar food income and look at that. That's 2,000 more gold actually versus Avely's 800 per minute. And the farms are actually getting outshined at this stage by the passive income of the pit mines. So once again, Malians just showcasing why they're such a powerhouse here in the late game with their passive incomes, able to field such a large amount of units.
Behind this, we do see biology almost completed for Galideco's Marlians, and I do really like this play, especially with the increased sofa count. I would love to see even more sofas being added, because ultimately, we look at Avely's composition, sure, there are 13 spears on the field, but besides that, nothing would deal effectively with these sofas. So a surprise sofa switch here, I think, could be incredibly effective for Galideco to finally take a decisive fight and reassert his map control, but he will need a lot more, as I mentioned just before. More are being added as we speak. We have skirmishes in the south side onto that gold mine as well. We'll see the pings on the arrows, and war in the north for Gully going up as well to further protect his economy. Yeah, like this sofa, this reinvestment into sofas, I think could prove really good for Gully in this case, but he needs to find a really effective angle to engage from here, which will make it those wood lines in the center towards the in and around the large gold mine will make it so much more difficult. He might instead opt to raid with them, which is also a very good choice, as that seems to be potentially what he goes for. It's actually responding to the raid in the north instead. But there is a raid in the south side as well, towards the south of Avery's base. We see a blob of yellow units there, idling out the gold, which is protected by a keep and a outpost there for Avery, but now that is no longer being gathered from.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? We've been missing that the entire game here for Abel. For Gully Deckle here. So difficult to really get anything done when you're always going to face the English mass in the middle head on with all their defenses and all of their bonuses in their defensive approach. What you really got to get going here is the attacks and sides. You got to get behind them, and look at that keep now being fully denied by that Sofa raid. All it took was simply just to take a detour from the middle, get to the top side, and then all of a sudden you find yourself 20 villagers damage here. So now Gully Deckle sitting on 82 villager kills versus Avery's 36. So if he keeps this up, he's going to be in a very, very good position.
And keep it up he must, right? As we mentioned so many times already, and you just highlighted again, Valdemar, you just can't keep headbutting this English death ball repeatedly, right? Ultimately, due to that network of castles and their stronger units, they will keep getting better and better value out of those trades, as well as their superior food economy. At this point in time, we can see over 3,300 for Averley, as well as just under 3,000 for the Malians by Gully Deckle. These kind of raids is what's crucial, and doing them repeatedly is something you must do against English when playing a civilization like this, like the Malians. You have to use that mobility advantage and your swarming potential in order to overcome these odds in a direct fight. But speaking of, we might have an engagement on our hands soon. Gully does think about going in there for a second, but he hesitates at the last moment, quite prudently so, potentially after seeing 5 mangonels on the field for Averley, nestled very, very snugly between that gold mine and the keep. But now finding himself on the defensive Gully, which is definitely not the position you want to be in as the Malians, as he now chases a large group of men-at-arms that have split off in the south side. And it's so difficult to deal with these men-at-armsers from the English because they are so tanky. They may not be quick, but they are very tanky. So you need to send many units to actually stop these raids, and that will further dwindle your army mass in the center, making it easier for the English to push in.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight again the importance of coaches in this tournament here. It's really this tunnel vision, this sort of playing a little bit scared maybe. You're stuck here in the base as Gully Deckle trying to face that mangonel mass, longbow mass. Now look at those mangonels actually getting some pretty decent shots here. So I'm actually going to just take a look at that. Look at those mangonels fighting up against the mangonels. It's the new siege meta that we've been seeing developing recently after the siege reverb of season 9 here. But again, back to my initial thought here. It's so important for the coaches really to get out there and say, look, you got to go on the sides. You got to keep playing aggressive here. And I think that's also what's happening here. You've got a pressure advantage. But again, we are looking at a very, very long game that might not necessarily have had to be so long.
Completely correct, and I do think the adjustable crossbars, I believe, which is the technology for mangonels in the Imperial Age, is something that's... Oh no, it's actually not, I was still surprised by the damage, but we see a complete envelopment and overwhelm here by Gully Deckle. Part of that is thanks to those sofas that I highlighted earlier. You can see the strength playing out here. There were not enough spears or anti-armor units for Averley out, and the result of which you can see, right, double the army count for Malians now, as opposed to the English, and now a lead in economy as well, as the center keep will fall without too much issues here for Gully, and now he seeks to press his advantage further. The sofas separate from the bulk of the army and press forward instead, as the rest of the units will clear up this forward infrastructure for Averley, and now really is when Gully finds himself with a lot more agency in this game, right? This is exactly what we needed to see, and the sofa switch really paid a lot of dividends for him. He will seek to go around this bulk ship potentially. Of course, he will be halted by quite a few layers of walls here. He might look to harass that gold mine potentially again, but Averley has remastered at this point. He recognizes how crucial that comp switch was for Gully, as he now has quite a numerous amount of hand cannoniers and spears as well, with 30 spears now, as well as 30 men-at-arms. Quite a severe melee infantry mass for Averley, which might be difficult for Gully to deal with at this point in time, but he does seek to drop his own keep now in the center and potentially rebuild that pit bound that he so desperately needs.
Yeah, you mentioned how he's clearing out the buildings in the middle, and I hope he also cleared out a bit of his tunnel vision. Now able to take those sofas into the back line here, and now force Avely to take half of his army maybe to go and defend against that, because that's a sizable cavalry mass now going into idle the whole English economy, and that is the lifeblood of them. They need the food, they need the gold that comes with farming as well as the civ bonus gives them. And so now able to push through the middle by just raiding in the back. Turns out, if you want to push the middle, you gotta attack somewhere else because your opponent is forced to go and do something about it. Now scouts are being added in as well. Scouts actually a little bit of an interesting addition here. The warrior scouts are fast, they heal up as well, but what's most important is they've got a good amount of damage against siege units as well, and so they're also a great meat shield. 200 HP with that biology upgraded, as we mentioned before, provides a really solid frontline, honestly, that I don't think a lot of people are using. Mangonels getting upgraded with additional crossbows here, adjustable crossbars here, and that's going to be really good against the hand cannon mass. Still got a lot of Musafati wars in the front. We've got that Archer mass as well. And so fighting here, I'm not sure who this favors. I would say Avely with his hand cannons and the networks of castles, able to push this back here, but there is a keep now set up for the Malian players. So the position is still strong. He has to watch out that he doesn't do what Avely just did, which is throw away all of his siege units.
Yeah, Scully has to move very, very carefully here in this position. He needs to keep stutter-stepping with that archer mass that he has, because these men-at-arms are very, very bulky and difficult to take down without enough of a mass of Musafadi gunners or Musafadi warriors, right? Which he does not really have in large amounts at this point yet. I mean, there are 24 on the field, but most of them are split off raiding, I do so believe. He falls behind the keep now to stage the defense, and that will be a very good spot for sure, as Avely is forced to back up just a little bit here to reconnect his army mass together, and now seeks to stage a grand offensive here on the keep. Tower is not yet dropped for Avely. I mean, the blueprint is there, but it is not up there, so there will be no network of citadels here in this fight, as both sides are pushing forward here, holding this position for everything it's worth, Gully, as Sofa split off again towards the north. They do catch a bombard, but I don't think he notices it just in time, as the bombard, I think, will survive, actually, in this case. But it does seem like Avely is in fact overwhelming the mass here at this point in time. Part of it is the sofas that did go off towards the north, right? Ultimately, the mass for Gully's Malians will suffer as a result here, but still the keep remains up, right? There is a battering ram now tearing at it, as well as a bombard behind it as well, shooting. And there's not too much stone left for Gully in the bank at this point, so he will not be able to repair it for much longer. And of course, the more villages you repair it with, the more stone is being drained inefficiently as well as a result of it. But ultimately, it does seem like Gully, with his army count down to 23 and dropping steadily at this point in time, has very little food and gold left in the bank for him, and virtually no wood anymore. It's looking quite difficult here for Malians, Valdemar.
It's looking terribly difficult. You've lost your main army and you're making archers and not the units that are actually countering this death ball that we've been talking about this entire game. We're looking at longbows fully upgraded, there are hand cannons, there are men-at-arms with their 10 ranged armor. It is pretty much impossible without a sizable force to deal with this. And so if you keep on losing units like we're doing here, you're never going to be able to do properly against this. There are longbows, they're able to snipe out your mangonels, there are hand cannons, and they're able to kill your sofas, right? You got the men-at-arms. And it potentially the strongest, I would say, meat shield that you can get in the game, with 10 armor and fully upgraded with elite army tactics. This is high quality army at play here versus, I would say, not as high quality. These are swarming units and they're not doing the swarming.
Well said indeed. It's just so important that, especially when finding himself under pressure like this, Cody keeps up those raids, keeps splitting Avely's attention, because ultimately you have to use that mobility advantage, right? Musafadis, although they do counter men-at-arms, they will not tank on the front line nearly as well. Sofas, although they are weaker than knights, they're ultimately faster, so they are better at raiding. And this is all these are all features of Malians that the Goidako must keep using, especially under pressure like this, right? You need to distract the English from this frontal push like this, otherwise you will just be, torn to shreds bit by bit here as most of your infrastructure starts falling. The Fort of the Hundreds is now down, so there will be no more first strike from stealth for Galideko's Musafadis or gunners at this point in time. We do see Banco repairs coming up for Gully Deco. Very, very powerful repairing technology unique to the Malians, but unfortunately it's a little bit too late, right? I do not expect that Fort of the Hunters to go up anymore with 3 bombards parked in front of it like that, and especially with the anemic food bank for Gully at this point in time, as now his villager count is starting to drop as well behind this. More men-at-arms raids on the sides as well. It's I want to be hopeful here for Gully's Malians, but it's just such a tough spot to try to recover from, Valdemar.
Yeah, you might want to be hopeful, but let's be realistic here. It's a tough one to play out. You haven't got that bounce back value that the English civilization has with those farms, with that huge income that AB has been able to bank up right now. If he goes to take a fight, immediately there will be a new army. Immediately. And so if you are to take a fight here, you can do so without getting your full value, but you are going to get that value. Your units are high quality. 30 men-at-arms are banked up, 20 hand cannons are ready to go. It's just about, you know, taking the next fight here. And so Gully Deckle, if he moves out preemptively here, he might find himself in a little bit of a tough position the moment that he's lost his army and that his own opponent has now replaced his within a few seconds.
Yes, and we did see a large raid again of men-at-arms onto that keep. You know, they're just tanking keeps with impunity at this point in time, and that's partly due to that level 3 ranged armor they have access to, as well as their innate tankiness with armor cloud upgrade. Now we see a sort of a final Hail Mary here coming in from Gully Deco as his army mass is looking quite healthy again. Mangonel's behind this as well, with adjustable crossbar technology now in for him as well, so they will do significant damage if those shots are able to connect. Bombards one-shotting that Mangonel with 3 on the field. It only makes sense as chemistry is likely in as well. It does look to be a decent fight here for Gully Deco, but as you highlighted, Valdemar, there's just such a rich bank here for Avery to replenish all of these forces instantaneously, and I'm sure his military infrastructure isn't lacking either, so the reinforcements will be here in quick time as well. And archers on the field for Gully Deco looking to do as much damage as they can, but realistically, with no access to incendiary arrows, which Malians just does not have innately, instead having precision training, I believe it's called instead, if I'm not mistaken. You know, and with no real resources for gunners behind this, is realistically, it's not really a fight that Gully can win, as he's once again forced back into his base with only half the army count left and less than half the bank.
I gotta say, like, we've got the God vision, but I will say this, though. We have to also recognize that this is a position that you can press. Ably sitting on 100 military units when his opponent has half of it. I wonder why he's not pushing. Like, why is he playing so careful here? He's got such a massive income right now, and his opponent is now given the time that he needs to mass up again, and then we're going to be replaying the same fight that we just had over and over and over. Seems a little bit unnecessary to me, but hey, let's take it for what it is. It's careful gameplay. You don't want to lose any games here. The first team that gets to 13 wins will win this final that's going to span across this weekend here. So it's every game that counts, whether you have your highest cost player or your lowest cost player playing. You want to get the maximal amount of value. You need every single victory to be able to win this tournament, as it is the consequence of all the accumulated games together that decides who wins, not the best of 5, which is not even a best of 5, it's a playoff 5.
That's right, absolutely. Every single game counts here, so I do understand why Gully is staying in this despite this advantage he finds himself under, as now a group of longbows look to raid that southern wood line, which is pretty much the last wood that Gully has access to at this point in time. And also makes me understand Avery's careful press forward in this situation instead of getting over eager. We did see wars go up on the north side and further raids on the south from him, so I do think he just wants to solidify his position in the center here first before looking to make a direct press centerwards. He might want to look to secure that southern sacred site as well, potentially, which is, you know, I'm led to believe that due to the wars in the north that go up to protect the northern sacred site, which he has not yet capped. We do see more university techs here coming in for Gully. We do have army tactics coming in finally, but of course the fight is taking place before that comes in, as we see Musafadi's, Donzos, Sofas, as well as archers, the main composition here for Gully, as well as longbows, hand cannoneers, men-at-arms, and spears for Avery. So really, Avery does just have the stronger army here inherently, as long as he can get that front line of men-at-arms to tank against those archers, because ultimately the hand cannoners will not trade cost effectively against those archers. Gully's pressing forward here, but there's so many outposts here, not only blocking his way, but also continually reinforcing that network of citadels aura for him. Now, the bombards are pushing forward to snipe out Gully's own siege behind this, as we see, one bombard does go down. There is one mangonel still left alive, but the army shuffling due to the hotkey causing the mangonel to be in the back. It almost goes down, but just barely survives as Gully covers his retreat with his army once again. Large wave of sofas behind this, looking to cut in towards Avery's army. There's a decent number of spears behind this, and with hand cannoners in the mix as well, they will not have quite the same effective punch as they did before. As you can see, most of them melt before they can even get any significant impact done, as once again Gully pushing against an unbreakable wall here, which is of course the English army, as we have seen time and time again whenever it reaches this stage of the game. It does seem like he will focus the bombard down and it will go down, but ultimately he is forced back again.
I hope Avery pushes now. We're looking at it with our God vision. I know that we've got that as casters. Looking at 84 military to 18. He has to recognize it now. He has to recognize that he can push through, get into the economy, and now start to do some damage. We've been dormant in the middle for too long now. Now he's going to come through. He's going to deny these 5 farms, but we need to split out more. We need to get to all corners of the base, which is, let's be honest, half the map at this stage. So we're looking at pit mines. We're looking at cows. We're looking at the farms all the way in the corner here. All of this has to be fully idled before we can really call this game done. And as our observer highlights here, some of the pit mines here are also not covered with the pit mine building. And so it's actually really just the farms that we need to take a look at, and the cows, of course. 2 out of 4 pit mines constructed. 2 relics in the middle as well, something that Avery could look to grab as well, providing a sizable gold, and with tithe barns, food and stone income as well. It ends up being fortified villages on top of it that can really boost your economy and allow you to produce more units, and as we see now, over 10,000 resources for Avery. It means that he's just going to be able to, even if he loses his units, to just immediately bounce back. Warrior scouts are now coming out, trying to get on top of the siege here, but they're just not going to be able to find that damage. Not with enough armor, they're going to take too much damage from the longbows, and networks of castles going to add an extra attack buff on top. Bombards do go down here, luckily enough for those warrior scouts. But hey, where are your army, Gully Deckles? Where is your army? Turns out there is no army left, and the game is over. 1 hour game, Myriad. What do you think?
Yeah, that was quite the game, and we highlighted at the beginning, right, the possibility of this matchup going quite late. Right, we did see Avery opt for the 2 town center economic play for the English as opposed to all-out aggression. Some of the influence of MarineLord, I suspect, who we know as this very calculated, methodical player who will not take unnecessary risks. He come out on top with a 2TC play, so that is what he's going to opt for. I know he mentioned that in the past, that he does actually favor English in this matchup, if I'm not mistaken. And Gully, he had some great raids in that castle age, but ultimately that's when it becomes difficult, right? He took that one fight in Avery's base, which ultimately was not favorable for him, and that was all the window that the English needed to press forward, extend their network of castles, go up to the Imperial Age, and when the raids slowed down from the Malians, from then on, really, it doesn't become that difficult for English to close the game out.
Yeah, if you can force your opponent to play like Avery did in that middle, get that tunnel vision for Gully activated, then you're going to be with a great, sizable, slow but potent army, hand cannons, men-at-arms, crossbows, spears, longbows, and there's not really a lot you can do. What you have to do with the Malians is to get in the base, as you highlighted, and there's simply just not enough of that, and that's probably why the game ended the way it did. Now, we are going to be looking at a full play all 5 here before we head into the Vortex and Louis MT set. And so I'm curious to see where Gully takes this next. He can, of course, play a lot of the civs. Only there being 2 bans and not really any civ picks means that you can pick from all of the civs that aren't banned and that you haven't played before. So as long as he doesn't pick Malians, English, Atri, and Byzantines, he can go into the next game and choose whatever he wants to.
Absolutely, and it seems like we have our map here. It's in fact, that's Scandinavia, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it looked a little bit like Calagua as well, but that is not the map, of course. So Scandinavia, up and coming hybrid map here. We have seen it first, notably, I believe, in King of the North, of course, in which you participated in yourself, Valdemar. We've
Mhm.
seen it more commonly now coming up in tournaments as well. Really, it's that does remind me a lot of Holy Island, but naturally with two sides to the water instead of one. Quite a few Civ possibilities here as well. What do you expect to see, Valdemar?
Yeah, that's the thing, right? You're looking at a couple of those classic hybrid civs like Japanese, Ayurved, Apposite, and those civs are incredibly strong when it comes to dealing with two sides, right? You want to get your fish boom going preferably on both sides, but your opponent is also going to contest that. And so the whole early game is centered around, can you secure your pond? And these ponds are quite long, as you mentioned. The Holy Island type of water means that we can get a lot of back and forth with the naval aspect of the game, but we can also quickly see just a couple of rams completely shutting down any sort of production on the water. And so both land and water units play a massive role in this map. Shushi versus the opposite, quite an interesting matchup on land maps. I would say is highly favored to the Shushi's legacy, but on a hybrid map like Scandinavia, it isn't so clear to me.
It is not, isn't it? And historically, Abbasid in particular has dominated these kinds of hybrid maps, right? Due to the ability to go up with that military wing, get the two free archers, the two free spearmen into a very quick ram drop to then take out the opponent's dock entirely if they
Mhm.
opted to go for it in the Dark Age, while setting up their own cheaper dock behind it as well to
Mhm.
further press their lead on the water. Abbasid has proved very, very capable and oppressive and hard to deal with on these kind of hybrid maps for a while now. Jushi, of course, is also a very strong water map in particular. Hybrid will be more interesting to see because naturally they are known for their economic prowess, not only due to the imperial officials that they have access to, just like China. That is a reason why China is very, very common on water maps, especially, but also, of course, the meditation gardens, right? Depending on the amount of resources you can get under its influence, that will really boost your economy, which in the early feudal age is especially important when resources and economies are not so grand, right? So I'm quite curious to see how this one plays out. I
Mhm.
wonder if we will see a skip by water entirely for Avery, at least initially on the Jushi here. Quite a few possibilities.
Yeah, Shushi, of course, known for being able to go incredibly speedy up to the Castle Age, getting access to Lancers and Palace Guards with the Mount Lu Academy and the upgrades that landmark provides. You can very quickly push out a lot of armored units. But back to the basics of Feudal Age, Shushi has got access to Shugenus immediately upon entering the Feudal Age, which is one of the toughest units to deal with for the opposite, simply because Shugenus counter pretty much everything you've got. You don't even need Spearmen to deal with the Horsemen, simply because you can produce them so quickly. But the thing is, with this map, Scandinavia, if you get access to the water and you are given the water for free and the Shugenu push doesn't really pay off, you're going to be stuck with an opponent that has all the food in the world, has Castle Age potentially, if you don't deny the gold. And that is going to lead to a pretty difficult position where you're playing with Shugenus versus armored units.
Yeah, and Jurgen en masse are certainly a force to be reckoned with. There's only a limit when it comes to the castle age, right? And if Abbasid does get up there with a boosted fishing eco, it can become very, very, very difficult for Jushi and vice versa, naturally, right? If Avery does somehow manage to secure that water, which I think will prove quite difficult in this matchup, which is why I'm particularly curious of the type of opening that we will see here, especially with the coaches advising them behind it. But it's just something we'll have to see within the coming minutes as we load into Scandinavia here for our game number 3 between Averley and Gully Deckle. Averley spawning in the north side of the map on the purple Jushi's legacy, facing Gully Deckle in the south side of the map in the yellow Abbasid dynasty.
Starting off here with a classic opener for the opposite. No dock opener means that he's going to be able to go to the fuel age at the standard pace and then choose if he wants to play culture wing or if he wants to play military wing. Culture wing granting him a cheaper ticket to get to the castle age with a reduction of the cost of H-ups and technologies overall. The military wing granting him 2 spears and 2 archers, and with the opposite innate civ bonus, now also able to construct a ram, he will be able to take out a potential dock opener early on from Avely. But that's not what we're seeing from Avely either. Avely opening up here with a mill opener into gold. So both of these players looks like they're going to go to the fuel age.
Yes, absolutely. There's no water being here from Avely either, right? Quite interestingly. And part of it is definitely because of the expectation for that military wing coming in from Gully Deco's Abbasid, right? I mean, it's not really something that I think Jushi or many other civs for that matter can deal with. If you do go for that fishing, you do delay your feudal age. So naturally you'll find yourself under the threat of not only a ram, but also 4 military units and an opponent's counter dock in turn on your own pond. And that's so tough to deal with for so many civilizations, Yushi being one of them. So I'm not too surprised to see Avery foregoing water here entirely, at least for now. Now that is something that is likely going to change coming up to the feudal age. Military wing now on the way for Gully Deco, whereas Avery is now closing in, and it will most likely be the meditation gardens here for him. Yep, dropped on the back onto the berries and the woodline.
Yeah, berries in the woodline, giving him access to one of the main resources that you need to produce ships, and it's a really good boost to that. Will grant him faster naval production should he choose to take the game into that direction. But I don't really know exactly how well trained these players are in the nature of hybrid maps. It's one of those discussion points a lot of the time is how many hybrid maps are there in the map pool? Because a lot of players struggle with dealing with two sides of water and the land map as well, and keeping track of all that your opponent might be doing. So maybe they are choosing to just keeping to the main strategy, which might be just to fast age up here with the Shushi's Legacy. But that's not what we're seeing here. Now, Abbasid Dynasty coming out with that dock opener, granting him access to the top pond for free. He's going to be able to maybe produce one ship, and then he can go full fishing boats after, and that's going to give him a very nice food income.
Without a doubt, right? And I do wonder whether we will be seeing that very quick castle age that has become, a trademark essentially of Jushi's legacy in the current meta, right? Especially on land, less notably so on hybrid maps like this, but it might still be something that if looks to open into. But with so much wood gathering, I'm not sure that will be the case, though we will have to see. Because look, I mean, as we saw and we know, if Abbasid does get access to even one pond, but potentially both here for free, and go for those fishing ships. Sure, ultimately it will be a huge amount of food for them to gather and have in the bank, right? And which will be a massive economic spike as time does go on. But ultimately, Abbasid is still known for that slow age up, right? So if they find themselves under threat of armored units, even with a boosted economy before they're ready for it, they could find themselves taking a lot of damage on land that they potentially might not have foreseen here. But instead, Avery does opt for the Juganu, as one archery range is out already, two, three Juganus now out on the field and pressing forward as they have been supervised. Is this just going to be all out aggression here from Avery?
I think so. Like, how are you going to deal with the military units? You're not if you don't make units. And they're going to be pinning you to your base if you go for the dock opener. And so, unless you're trying to contest the dock, you're going to be dealing with land units as well. And so, it's a pretty good move, I would say, for him to go for Shuganu. Um, but I wonder if it's even worth it to go for a continuous production of them and then potentially try to deny something like House of Wisdom Age up for the Castle Age. Now, looking at that villager, it's probably gonna confirm my suspicion that he was gonna open up with Shuganus, defend against the military wing units, and then safely go for the dock opener. But the problem with that is his opponent already has the boat production on the top pond for free. And so, yeah, it gives you an opportunity to now take the opposite pond that has not been secured. But again, it is at a slower pace. And so I would say in the overall analysis, Avery is perhaps a little bit more behind at this stage, but he can take this advantage of having the counters and then turning that into a lead.
Well said, absolutely. He is a little bit behind in terms of water tempo here, at least, right? I mean, Gully's economy will pick up a little bit faster than Avery's, but Avery does, of course, have access to the Imperial Official and the Meditation Gardens, as we have highlighted. So that will help him pick up at least some of the slack here. It's not the most impressive Meditation Gardens, netting just over 50 resources per minute there, close to just over 60. We have seen more affluent ones in the past, right? But that won't be the case here. Now, in terms of progression here, I mean, there's only a few units out for Avery at this point in time, just enough to force a reaction of Gully Deco, as we see not only an archery range, but of course a stable from Gully as well, with horsemen and archers following in production in tow, whereas Avery did not reinvest in many more units as a result, instead opting to take that southern pond there, which the fact that Avery got access to it in the first place is something he definitely will be happy with himself about, because really it's not something that Gully should have even allowed, I would say, in the first place. But I guess Avery was quite quick on those units, and he used that window very well to drop the dock, which is also built even faster by Jushi's legacy, similarly to China, than regular civilizations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're probably going to be expecting a little bit of a long feudal age here, whereas both players will be continuously producing fishing boats on the ponds. They're also going to be fighting on the land, trying to deny the fishing boats and the dock construction here on either sides. And so it is kind of an interesting game that we're going to be seeing here. How are they going to go back and forth? How is mobility going to play a role here? Whereas one player is going full infantry, the other is playing faster units. Similar to the first game we talked about, how horsemen and archers are faster than longbows and spears. We have similar movement speeds here. Shuganu sharing the same movement speed as the longbows, and so they will be outmaneuvered by higher mobility units like horsemen and archers. And so Gully can look to do those raids. He can look to go for the enemy's position when he's seeing that his opponent's attacking his docks. Docks are so cheap, and so he doesn't really need much to really go for that leverage, which is, hey, I can just make a ram. You're on either side. I now know that I have all this time that you need to just walk across.
Absolutely, and if this RAM does go up, which with the amount of units building it, it seems like it definitely will. I think it puts Avery in a very, very difficult position here, because the only real unit he has that can deal with those rams is, of course, the spearmen, which to even get on top of the ram, they will have to expose themselves to those archers. But now Galley does come out for Avery, which I think is a prudent choice, although it will essentially just tickle the ram, even as Springboard ships do for that matter. They're also very ineffective at dealing with rams. It does allow Avery to keep control of that shore and push Gully Deco's army away if he looks to defend against that ram, which, with his units moving now towards that southern shore, is looking to be on the cards. So well done there by Avery for that. Because ultimately, as we mentioned, if the spears are forced to go next to the archers, then the horsemen will have free reign on the Juganu. Now, what I'm particularly interested in seeing in this matchup here is we have to see the level of water contention that we will see from either side, how much they look to disturb each other's water economy, as well as the investment into units here in the feudal age, because we do have to keep in mind, Jushi notoriously has one of the fastest, most oppressive age-up timings, whereas Abba, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, has one of the slowest, using no villagers to age up, ultimately boosting their economy as a result, but slowing down their tech timing in turn. So I think the pressure is a little bit on Gully here to get a really good gauge of the amount of investment that Avery is making into units, as opposed to going up to Castle Age if he chooses to do so, which he's doing very well now with his little horseman raid, which will pick up a villager for his efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you highlight, it's so important that Gully assesses the situation and actually understands when he needs to strike. I think the simplest thing that he can do is simply just continuously produce units. And then as long as he doesn't take a bad fight and that he has access to water, similar to his opponent, he will, the moment that Avery stops going for feudal age units, be able to go for an attack. But that window might be very, very short because of the fast age up of the Shushi's legacy compared to the slow one of Abbasid Dynasty. And so it's really on Avery to decide where this game goes, because Gully Deckle is going to be stuck chasing after the pace that Shushi's legacy can provide this game with. Now we see that dock in the bottom, the attack ship here coming across, trying to deny some of the resources here provided by the fishing boats, and that's simply not going to be an opportunity for Gully Deckle here, as Avery has already produced a couple of warships, a couple of archer ships, and is able to now full deny the attack here on the bottom side.
And that dock in the south is something that Avery might look to want to deal with at this point in time. But we do see, in terms of macro, he is in fact stacking up the food now, starting to stack up the gold as well. So it's a tough position in which, do you actually commit to this car stage, which I think Gully might be aware of at this point in time, with these horsemen that he has been watching gather perhaps more food than Avery would even need at this point in time with the amount of units that he's producing. So will Avely actually commit to this castle age, or will he commit to more ships on the southern pond to try to deal with that dock? And obviously both are going to strain his economy. And look, we do see 6 more space in Q, 2 more Jugenu. All of that res is reinvested into units, so he's not going to pull the trigger just yet.
Yeah, and it's important to not do that. We need to get those Shugenus out, we need to get those spears out, but we also don't want to overproduce here. Look at that demo ship getting such a nice connect here. And now the attack ship, the archer ship is going to get countered by the Springle ship. And that means that now the archer ship on the other side of the pond, down on the bottom side here, is actually able to go and deny this food income. This is a pretty big deal. That one demo ship, 160 resources, have just turned the entire pace of that bottom water to be not fully favored for Avely, now also pretty evened out for now Gully as well. We see an attack now at the woodline here at the top side, and the army of Avely a little bit out of position. And so that's a full denial as well. A lot of idle time coming in for Avely. Not a lot of resources are going to be dropped off at this pace. And so this might be an opening for Gully Deckle to look for another dock on the bottom to then full deny the water. And that is what he needs to be able to take control of this game, to get access to the water on both sides.
And it's just such a tough spot now for Avery as a result of these just last essentially half a minute that just went on, right? That demo was so crucial for Gully Deck in that position. And just at the same time, Avery did go onto a big raid onto Gully Deckle's woodline, picking up a few villages, but not quite enough to cancel out the damage that was done to him. And the worst part of all, Valdemar, Avery's dock, both docks on the southern pond went down. So on top of losing so many fishing ships, most of them, pretty much, well, all of them are now idle as well in turn. And the sneak out by Avely attempted with these villages is caught by Gully Deckle's archers. They will go on the chase now. Now, the Jugenu mass is very scary here for Avely, so the archers will not be able to follow the villagers, but new units from Gully will look to deny this undoubtedly, right? There is still a ram on the field as well, which might look to take these down, but you can see Avely's food income has taken such a severe tumble, 36 per minute now, not even enough for villagers at this point in time. And this is a tough spot to recover from, right? I'm not sure whether if he will even be able to reassert himself on that southern pond if Gully just looks to drop a second dock at this point in time and reinvest there. I think Avely is going to be left in a really, really tough position.
Yeah, and I feel like that position is already coming in, although it was a little bit slower than perhaps expected in terms of the aggression on the water. Gully is also making those very, very difficult mistakes here, just being mechanically limited and now losing out on these archers, plus the archers on the top side, is actually a pretty big deal because it's what allows Avely to come back on water. If he's able to have a sustained wood income, he's going to be able to now take back the bottom pond, but look at that, he's already lost so many fishing boats. And that's already a lot of damage for Gully, and that's perhaps what he needs with a fully uncontested double top pond here. He can perhaps look to go for Castle Age.
Absolutely, and I think honestly, Castle Age is probably what he will need to survive here to some extent, because although he has the northern pond secured and most of the southern pond denied for Avely, that Jugenu and Spearman mass is starting to look incredibly scary, right? And ultimately, all that income for Gully is useful, but if you can't actually put it into units to survive an onslaught from the enemy, really, it doesn't exactly doing much for you in the long term, right? But yeah, as you highlighted in terms of Gully's mechanics there, it's so difficult, isn't it? And that's what has been highlighted by these hybrid maps throughout tournaments in the past as well. Ultimately, they are so demanding on a player's attention span as you're dealing with equal parts with land micro as well as water micro. So it's so easy for one to end up suffering as a result. Ultimately, we're all only human, right? So we can only focus on so many things at once. Now, Culture Wing is fired off here for Gully Deckle. Now on the way, 1 minute and 20 seconds to go, and Avely recognizes this, right? Not missing a beat. More Jugenus in queue. He has no notions of Castle Age yet, as it seems, as he just looks to make a grand push here towards Avely, which I think is the right play, right? You will need to get quite a severe amount of damage done here if you are Avely in order to crawl back into this game, I would say.
Yeah, definitely, and it's what we talked about in the beginning as well. You're looking at production in the feudal age from both players, which means the moment that someone stops producing, that's also when they start to go behind. Even if they're going to go to the Castle Age, the Opposite Dynasty are so slow at doing so that it could potentially mean that he will lose due to the fact that he has now spent 1,800 resources getting up to the Castle Age, but never getting any value out of it because he's lost access to all the resources. That demo ship just took out yet another 2 warships here for Avely. Avely, and that's a problem because he's going to lose access to the bottom side unless he reinvests. And this could mean that Avely is now stuck in the feudal age, trying to keep his bottom pond alive and well, but also trying to deny whatever gold Gully might need to just even get any of the Castle Age upgrades and units out.
Well said indeed, and we highlighted this necessity for Avely to get damage done here as he looks to push into the exposed gold here for Gully. There is one outpost up already protecting him, but I'm not sure that will be enough. There's a decent amount of gold in the bank, enough for the archer upgrade and potentially some knights. We'll have to see what he prioritizes here. It is going to be the veterancy for the archers as well as preservation of knowledge to further discount all of his technology from here on out. Of course, the culturing gives access to preservation of knowledge. Several villages going down on the retreat here, so he looks to drop more archery rages. And I think with enough archers being produced by Gully, he will be able to eventually push this back thanks to the veterancy. They will, of course, be stronger than Zuganu at that point in time, but he will need a lot more archers, and he will really need to be very careful with how he moves his villagers here, because ultimately, although he is ahead economically and technologically at this point in time, if he does take too much damage, it's going to be a very, very difficult hold. Now, engagement horsemen go directly onto the Zuganus, but are screened by the spears. Villages migrating now towards the northern gold here, which might potentially be exposed soon as well. And so many idle villages now in the south side of the map as Avely dives in directly towards the mass. Now, they're disconnected from the spears a little bit, so the horsemen find a good little engagement there, back off just in time, but the veterancy is in now finally as the engagement looks to happen. I think there is still a few too many Zuganu here for the archers to handle, at least for now. It will come down to those horsemen partly as spears are dropping quickly. Only one left alive, two actually, alive at this point in time. Now, the horsemen do fall, but there's still too many Zuganus for these archers to handle, Valdemar.
Yeah, and that's the problem with the Shugenus as well in this tournament setting is you're playing these hybrid maps and you're playing these civilizations that are now stuck playing both waterside and they're playing on the land side. And those Shugenus, they counter so many units that the problem is even if you have a Castle Age advantage, if you're still running wood units like horsemen and archers, they still take a lot of damage because of their lack of armor. And so the Shushi's Shugenu mass is still as relevant versus a Castle Age opponent as it is versus a Feudal Age opponent. Now, they both have access to a pond, but the villagers are being moved around left and right for Gully, and so with only 14 military, he has no hope of actually securing his resources properly. All Avely has to do is move to the side where the villagers are, push them around, and then as a consequence of that, he will passively get ahead in resources simply because his opponent is not gathering.
You're completely correct, and I do believe behind this, one ram from Avely has actually done tremendous work for him, if I'm not mistaken, as I think all of Gully's docks in the northern pond did go down, if I'm not mistaken. I think another one got rebuilt, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I think this one just got rebuilt, I believe. So his food income will resume now because it dropped quite severely below 400 for a few moments there for Gully, but there is double dock now out for Avely on the northern pond as well. Arrow slits on the way as well, and here we see the Shaolin Monastery with 18 villages going up now for Avely as the upgrades will follow in tow. And with such a severe army lead for Avely, even though Gully has several knights and more in queue now on the field, I think once these upgrades come in for Avely and he looks to make a push, I don't really see Gully holding this.
Yeah, and how are you gonna hold your gold when it's in the front, right? You just ran out of gold in your base, your main gold is gone, and now you're looking with a mid map that sort of leads into your opponent's army where you need to go. You need access to that gold, otherwise the Castle Age was pointless in the first place. And now you're playing knights and crossbows. Both of those units are countered by the spear and the Shuganu, and now your opponent is in Castle Age. The top pawn is now being contested. Avely has gotten up there. He's got his warship. He's got that Springle ship now contesting the pond as well. So the last thing that Gully's actually got going for him was the food, which is now being pushed around because he's now getting contested on the top water. And so the position now is difficult. He needs to find damage. He needs to do something with this Castle Age that he chose to go for, because now his opponent played this out very methodically, slow-paced. He has now kept his bottom pond, has kept his unit mass, and everything is now getting upgraded as a consequence of that.
Yes, and behind it, crossbowmen are being added for Avely as well as for Gully. In terms of fishing, it seems like Avely has now reasserted full control of that southern pond, 17 fishing ships out for providing quite a notable income. Whereas on the north side, Gully also has plenty of his own fishing ships, but that will soon be contested by Avery, no doubt. But Avery does look to make his push now. Level 2 Steel Arrow in for him at the same time, as so many Zuganu's out now with Veterancy 2, and no real answer for Gully here. I mean, there's some archers, but they do not trade well against Zuganu's. There's 5 knights, 6 now out on the field, but with so many Zuganu's, as well as spears and crossbows being added, it's not really enough for Gully realistically to hold. And this, it's so clear, we highlighted before, the struggle for Abbasid in this kind of a situation where, sure, they're so capable on a map like this because of their early prowess and the economic advantages they have, not only with the cheaper docks, but also the Golden Age gathering rate bonus, which is a notable 15% for them. But the slow age up, especially on a map like this where economies can be severely boosted by the food income of fishing, it can become such a severe issue for them when aging up. And Cal highlighting the absolutely anemic bank for Gully Deco, definitely a very, very sore position to be in. But really, the writing's on the wall here. Not only does Avery have the superior army, but the count is now doubling as well, and the economy is now starting to get a bit out of hand in terms of a lead for him as well, with relics being picked up behind this too. I think really, sadly, it's only a matter of time for Gully in this game.
Absolutely, yeah. We're looking at a terrible position here, and it was really just a consequence of just not having that tempo and the unit quality that the Shuji has. And that tempo, being able to leverage with a fast age up and just really getting in there with units that scale well into the Castle Age and even versus Castle Age opponents. The Shugenu's super strong. Now we're looking at a fight here. The archers are trying to do some damage here, but Gully Deckle just doesn't have the mass. He doesn't have any front line. He needs a mangonel or something. It's really difficult to try to defend against something that's like a death ball, right? You touch it and you lose everything. You can't really get close to it because the moment you do, you take 3 times as much damage in return because you have no armor. And so this is a problem when dealing with the Shushi's legacy, especially on a map like this. Now keep getting dropped here in the middle and attempt to go and actually secure some map control, but the problem is you don't need map control when you don't have a base, because you need base control first and foremost.
Very aptly put, Valdemar. I cannot disagree with that reality, really. I mean, a keep to secure map control would be fantastic in this situation, but I think a keep to ensure the bare minimum of survival would be equally important, I would argue, as we see the army mass of Avery pushing in mercilessly deeper and deeper into Gully's base. Rams taking out the infrastructure as well. Soon enough, even Golden Age will be a thing of the past for Gully Deckle's Abbasid here, as the Ram is doing a little bit of breakdancing for us behind all of this, as we see. That's not exactly...
It's just stunting on us at this point.
Yeah, that's not exactly safe for work. I don't think we should be showing that. But either way, game is now finished as GG is called for Gully Deckle, as he now finds himself 3-0 down in the set against Avery. So difficult as Avery takes the W.
Yeah, I think we can break it down to the calmness and being a seasoned tournament player as Avely is. He's able to build up a position, whereas his opponent, brand new to the tournament scene, now going to find difficulty trying to get back from a position where you're behind 3 games. You have a lot of pressure on you. You have your coach trying to make up for where things might be going wrong. But in the end, it's all about the player with the hands. You might not have a brain, as MarineLord put it, but if you have hands and a brain accompanied with it, then you're going to win. The problem is, if the hands don't work, where are you going to go next?
Well said indeed. MarineLord is in fact a large believer in mechanics being quite a necessary basic in order to succeed in these kind of tournaments. Rightly so, I would say, at least to a certain extent. You can see here on the graphs, I mean, the economy kill doesn't lie, right? It was looking quite decent for Gully Deco at this point in the early feudal age there, after taking out the docks and plenty of Avery's fishing ships. But it comes back to what we mentioned before, right? You need to be so careful as the Abbasid when facing a stronger feudal age army to get a very accurate gauge on the level of spending that the opponent is doing on the said army, as opposed to going to Castle Age, right? And Goidako thought he was safe with going up to Castle Age there, but he misjudged the investment just slightly, right? Avery just kept producing units mercilessly and was able to get enough damage done, not only onto Gully's economy, but also onto his army, to the point where he's so ahead in army and economy by the time he gets to Castle Age that he can essentially just get his units upgraded and then roll over the base without too much resistance at that point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, right? You're looking at getting access to new units in the Castle Age, the Gulams, the crossbows, the knights, the mangonels. But what are those units going to do when you're up against 60, 70 Shugenus, each Shugenu dealing a minimum of 3 damage? Your units, even if they have 120 HP or 150 HP, they will get whittled down rather quickly. And so it becomes terribly, terribly difficult to deal with. The next map we're going to be looking at is going to be Holy Island, another one of those maps where you really got to have hands, which means you got to be present multiple positions. You might be raiding, you might be in your base, but you're also fighting both land and water, similar to the map that we just played, but with just one pond instead, which might lead into more of a naval focus more so than a hybrid focus. It's hard to play very fast on Holy Island in terms of ships because you have such a long distance between where the docks are. And so once you take a look at something like a fast H ship from the HRE and so maybe fast archer ship, Springle, demo, the Chinese might be up 30 seconds later, but they might be able to produce 2 ships immediately. And that's the difficulty of playing this map. You are going to be usually playing not with that early advantage. You're going to have to focus on how are you going to approach the mid game and the mid game naval fights. A lot of the naval fights end at 10, 12 minutes, and a lot of them keep going till 30, 40 minutes.
Without a doubt, true and well said there, absolutely. As we do now load into game number 4 between Gully Deco and Averley. Averley playing the Holy Roman Empire in the color blue for Team MarineLord, spawning on the north side of the map. And at the south side, we see Gully Deco playing as the yellow Chinese for Team Beastyqt in this set for us. As natural dock opening for both players here, nothing too surprising here as of yet. And I want to go back to what you mentioned earlier, Valdemar, and I think you very rightly highlighted the dynamic of the two matchups here, especially now with the reduced Archon radius on the chapel for the influence from the inspiration for the prelates. Of course, I do think, and on a map like this, as you highlighted, with a large crossing distance from one side of the water to the other, I do think it will prove slightly difficult for HRE, more difficult than in the past as a result of those realities. I mean, we have seen people in the past look to offset the long crossing distance somewhat by dock dropping the opponent actually on their side of the pond. But that can be a little bit difficult, right? Because ultimately, if you do end up losing that position and getting denied on those docks, that's actually such a horrifically bad spot to play from because they are incredibly expensive early on, right? 150 wood is definitely an investment at this point in time. And notably, you can't really dock drop in the center because, as you can see, there's no deep sea fish of any kind in the center. So if you do have notions of fishing there, that will, of course, not be possible.
Yeah, and you are going to end up playing a very all-in game if you do decide to do those dock drops, and only a select few civs are really good at that. Dock dropping, notoriously known as being a very early strat. It's a strat where you can very quickly cut off a greedy opponent that goes maybe for a 2 dock opening. Now you're going to be seeing a no dock opening in the Dark Age, getting into the Feudal Age. Dropping those docks is going to be incredibly powerful. But let's continue on here because we aren't seeing any of that. They're both going to go for their classic deep sea openings here in the Dark Age. And look at that, just as our observer just highlighted there, 2 golds, 1 berry, and 1 stone together means that it's going to be an incredibly powerful meditation. Sorry, not meditation garden, Barbican here, because it can defend so many resources. It means that it's going to be quite good for a potential drop here.
Yes, and quite commonly we see a Holy Island spawn in this way, right? Where there's pockets of quite notable amounts of resources of different types spawning together. Particularly reason why Jushi's Legacy is a very common pick on this map, though. But of course, Avery does not have access to them yet. Part of the reason that he picked Holy Roman Empire. Now, in terms of the Aachen, we do have the back wood line for Avery, which is definitely something that he's going to be happy with, I would say. And there's no threat of any early Jugenus or horsemen, which can be supervised out by the Chinese to threaten that, at least initially. no secondary resource is going to be under that Archon, unfortunately for him. But on the other side, we have a very good spawn for Gully as well, with that back gold and the woodline so close together, means that an Imperial Academy is going to net a lot of tax income for him from both of those buildings, which is where he will have the bulk of his gathering from.
Yeah, absolutely. The tax income is so important. It's really the lifeblood of the Chinese economy, being able to get so much extra gold simply by having some imperial officials just going around passively collecting it. Just from those drop-offs, if you have your Imperial Academy put on top of that wood line, you're going to be absolutely fine and have endless amount of tax going for a long time. Even if you are out of gold in your base, you'll be able to, go ahead and use those tax and keep up with whatever is gold income for your opponent. We are looking at a double dock opening here for Avely, and this is again what we highlighted in the pregame. This is such a long span of water that often leads to naval fights. So a dock opening like this, 2 docks, means that it's more greedy, but it's also difficult to punish such a long span of water here. Even if you were to go for a 1 dock opening and get fast up, get up quicker to the fuel age, quicker than your opponent, and producing more ships as a result of that. Now Imperial Academy being dropped here with 5 villages. And so that's a very fast H-up. Avely is not really close yet to getting his H-up, and so he will be stuck in H behind for a little while as a result of the 2 docks.
And notably so, we essentially see a reversal of the typical strategies that either of these civilizations would employ in this matchup, right? As you mentioned yourself before the game, Valdemar, typically HRE does look to use the injection of economy that the Aachen Chapel gives them early on to obtain a tempo lead over the Chinese in terms of ships and water control, which is made difficult on a map like this, of course. And I think that's very well recognized by Avery because of his delayed age up and double dock here. And sure, Golidako has that not only faster age up thanks to the building of the Chinese villages, but he's going to be able to get the galley out quickly, which it did seem like he missed backwards slightly, and the galley's in fact delayed. But even if it was on time, realistically, he will not be able to get much damage done on the opponent's side of the water. And we have seen a very similar dynamic play out in this on this map last week in a Japanese mirror, if some of you might recall, where one of the Japanese players, I can't quite remember the match, excuse me for that. I think it was Numadan Avely, actually, where one of them went for a very few amount of fishing ships, whereas the other went for a very large amount of fishing ships in the Dark Age. And ultimately, there was really no much chance for damage to be done by the quick galley. And I think we're going to see a very similar effect here, as the galley does move out across the map towards the ships, but the galley is soon to follow by Evely. And very well highlighted by our observer Cow here, the Predator did not in fact go into the Aachen Chapel as of yet. So the Holy Inspiration will not be, it does in fact go in now, thankfully for Avely, because of course a Predator can only inspire 8 villages at a time by himself, but naturally in the Aachen the inspiration is constant within that radius. So and right here we see, right, the galley has arrived for Gully Deco, but ultimately there's already a galley out for Avely on the defensive, right? So the galley is just simply not going to find any damage done. And now Avely, on top of his superior economy, at least initially, also finds himself 4 fishing ships ahead.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting, right? You had that first Archer ship coming around at 6:30, even though you went for a fast H-up. And so, what do you really gain of that? You didn't really get any leverage early, and now you have an opponent who is ahead economically. And so, again, what can we learn from this? Well, now we see that it's simply just the case that double dock opener is maybe a little bit stronger here, able to get a little bit more boats out and then still play a good defensive position here. Thus, we are still taking a look at the land here, adding in archers. Now, that's going to be a pretty nasty direction for this game to turn for Avely, because he will be fully invested into the water side here should he not spot this archer. And this one archer will provide an immense amount of value for Gully if he's able to full deny the gold, as his opponent will now not be able to produce either warships or demo ships.
That's right, and the barracks is put up preemptively by Avely here. I'm not sure if he exactly scouted the type of production that Gully is going for, or if it is more of a preemptive barracks for him to do his own type of harassment with men-at-arms here, which does seem to be the case, as the archer is just outside of vision and range here. He does finally shoot that first arrow towards Avely's villagers as they are now pushed off of the gold, but the one man-at-arms is going to be able to push back the one archer for now. We do have more archers on the way for Gully Deco behind this, so we'll see the level of investment that he looks to go into here for now. Many fighting ships behind this as well, as now up to 3 Springald ships, 1 galley, and a demo with another Springald ship in production. No further fishing ships added by either player, I believe, as of yet, as Avery still leading by 3.5 or so fishing ships, and Gully looks to make another aggressive push onto the water at the same time. But we have to be so careful in these kind of situations on Holy Island specifically, right? Because ultimately, just as if you would be pushing on land, you have to contend with a defender's advantage. It's a similar issue on water, right? And in some ways, it's further exacerbated by the existence of demolition ships, which are so quick and can really catch fleeing ships.
Yeah, absolutely. It can end in a couple of seconds. If you look away and you don't look to your water side, all of a sudden, 3 demos, that's all it takes, will wipe your whole fleet. And so you gotta be on point here. It's always water first if you're fighting on it, and then it's land, but you cannot negate land, and that's the tough part for a lot of players. You gotta multitask here, you gotta have those hands. And as we can see here, that archer there, taking a little bit of damage from the opponent's archers. A couple of archers for sure here getting queued up as well, and then also cancelled. Right after here. So not going to be an overinvestment at this point for Avely. But a proper defense now leads into more units and now a counterattack for Avely as he's now producing archers and men-at-arms versus an opponent that is still not able to win over on the water. So potentially he can lock down much of the economy for Gully Deco should he be able to win land.
Completely, yes. I mean, this type of infantry mass from Avery can become quite scary as it scales. Ultimately, Gully does have access to, of course, the Juganu with Song Dynasty, if that's something he opts to go into. But so far, the resources aren't quite close to it. But now the units are in Gully's base, right? So he's pushed off with gold completely. Now, he will have access to taxation, of course, behind this, depending on the amount of officials that he has out. But ultimately, this wood line has really been chopped into by Gully at this stage, right? Meaning that the back of it is not going to be within the town center's range. And these 2 men-at-arms and archers are really putting a world of hurt here because the horseman is going to kill the archer, but the 2 men-at-arms are really left unanswered here, and the only answer really is going to be archers and or Juganu. Juganu, as we mentioned, can't be produced yet. And this constant idle time here is going to be really a thorn in Gully's side as a Vil goes down, the first one so far. Behind this, of course, water fights are happening as well. There could have been a very good demo opportunity there for Gully, but he just wasn't paying attention, unfortunately, as neither was Avely. But now Avely's own demolition ships are moving into position. Does pick up 1 Springald ship for his efforts there, so good value gained at that point in time, as so far it's still looking to be a bit of a stalemate on the water. You can see the destroyed value starting to climb a little bit here for Avely, so better trades for him in combination with the land there, and now wheelbarrow on the way for him as well, whereas Gully already has it in at this point in time.
Yeah, so it's a stalemate at this point. No player taking any particular advantage here besides Avely being ahead in 6 economy units. They're both with a sizable amount of warships and demo ships, and so they're able to thus keep a stalemate going here. One of them will have to either invest more into land or more into water in order to break it compared to the other player, right? And so if you see that value that was had from the raid on Gully's base, yeah, if you can redo that success, if you can reenact that, then you will be able to potentially outproduce him on the water side if the economy is idled long enough. Now we see those warships moving a little bit back and forth here. Demos are being positioned in the corner as we usually see here on the Holy Island. Vision is often a bit of a big deal here because the docks only provide so much, and the warships and archer ships don't really give enough vision to often spot demos hiding in the corner here. This bit of posturing here back and forth is often what we see when we are building up demos here, and Avely not really having a lot of demos might get overwhelmed the moment that Gully strikes.
It's definitely a possibility, right? Especially with this very effective angle demos on the side here for Gully Deco, both on the left side as well as on the right side. Now, the ones on the left moving a little bit prematurely, I would say, and they get sniped out pretty much instantly by Avely's navy there, but they come in from on the right side as well. Archerships moving to position. Good snipe so far by Avely. All of the demos go down without dealing any damage from Gully, so that's definitely not a good trade. But demolition from Avely picks up 2 Springald ships as well as an archer ship, I believe, from Gully Deco. Big value gain there. More value gained from one of Avely's demos than 4 from Gully's is definitely a very bad spot for him to find himself in as another demo moves forward. That will be sniped just in time there by Gully before a connection onto the Springboard ship. But the mass does not lie here, right? I mean, more and more ships being added by either side. It did look quite in favor of Avery for a second there, but now on the defensive, Gully is going to have a slight advantage with a rally point. But more demos coming in from the back for Avery at this point in time. It does seem like it will be difficult for demos to pass through the line of ships at the front, right? This is quite a feature of Water Micro that often plays a part in games. But the split screen coming up on the side there, we can see a large raid by Avery's military on land as well, idling out Gully's gold economy completely as they're forced to reside in the village. And behind this, he's pushing forward with the demos as well. It looks like we almost have some significant connections there, but not quite just in time as Gully's pushed back all the way to the docks. And behind this, on land, his wood economy is now in threat as well as an Imperial official goes down too. And he doesn't have the army military numbers to deal with this push, Valdemar.
No, definitely not. Ooh, look at that demo, juicy demo coming in on the
Yeah.
warships here as well. I gotta say, Averly has not invested into as many demos as Beastyqt did in the beginning here, but he's found way more value of the few demo ships that he did invest into. And now with that military army in the economy of Beastyqt, it doesn't take more than a handful of units like that and an overinvestment to water from your opponent to really just win a massive advantage here. It's like the classic, you see a knight on your gold, or you don't, and the moment you don't see it, that knight is taking out 5-6 villages, right? So you really gotta be on your game here. That army in the base now, first getting wiped out after such a long time here.
Yes, finally gets cleared up for it gets cleared up by Gully Deco. But you can see just in the bottom right, the worker kills, right? So much damage done by Averly, most of it on land at this point in time, which will hurt even more than the fishing ships, of course, at this point in the game. And now another barracks being added by Averly, and a lot on gold at this point in time, as well as the food starting to be banked up now as well. I believe there's going to be a reinvestment into fishing ships potentially for Averly, but I might be mistaken. I think it's just more military ships as well as archers, it looks like. Now, Gully, down to 9 Springboard ships, 2 demolition ships, and archers, is going to look to make another push here on water, as he seems to posture. Doesn't have nearly as many demos as before, but maybe he can find more value here. Avery's own demos move forward, get sniped out completely, but a Springboard ship falls as well for Gully. The second demo gets sniped as well by Avery, but Gully also snipes Avery's demo at this point in time. So not much damage done by the demos, and now the Springboard ships and archer ships are just attacking each other directly at this point in time, almost with anger, it looks like. But another demo comes in and falls, but behind this little raid by Gully to get some counter damage done is going to get shut down quite imminently.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Right now, we're seeing that snowball effect happen. Now we see Averly being up 3 times as much military as Gully, and Gully does throw in the towel here. He does eventually surrender this game over. GG gets cold, and water is not surprisingly. So surprisingly, isn't one here for Averly, but he did manage to attain a great enough advantage on the land while they were fighting on the water side. And it just goes to show you how important it is to be proficient on the multitasking aspect when you play these hybrid maps. A seasoned player that's played it before versus a player that's under pressure, that is the conundrum that Beasty finds himself in as he's trying to apply maybe some higher level strats here to a player that might not have the experience.
This version of Lipany that we're using, EGC Lipany, is quite different from base Lipany, particularly in the sense that a lot of the food is projected slightly more forward. So although there's more of it, it is harder to defend than on your typical Lipany that you would play on the ladder.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not going to see those crazy spawns where you have a completely blocked off middle area and you have to go around this sort of mountain area. That's probably not going to happen here with this alternate version of Lipany that most of you might already be familiar with, having watched tournaments before. The Lipany spawn here obviously being a little bit more predetermined. So I will say this, the food is not going to be as abundant as we see on the standard Lipany version. Here it's a little bit more spread out, and so something like Pro Scouts might show to be prove to be one of the stronger strategies to pull off here, as both civilizations do get a lot of value from that. And we are now booting up the game here. We are heading into Gully Deckel in the yellow as the French versus Avery's Ruse in blue here.
Starting off straight away, we see the hunting cabin from Averly, and in fact, A new development here that we've seen in the past month, especially instead of opting for the singular hunting cabin, Roost players now tend to go for that second hunting cabin within the Dark Age as well. A simple 50 wood gathered from the nearby straggler tree by your initial starting villagers will make that very, very possible without setting you too far behind in terms of age up. As we see, despite the double hunting cabin start, Avery's still the first one to actually drop his landmark in this case. Perks of that passive gold, of course, that you get from gathering food nowadays as Roost. The gold will be the golden gate for Avery's Roost. No real surprises here. Real resurgence we have seen in terms of Golden Gate since the last patch, and notably so. The amount of value you get from those favorable ticket trades is really, really crucial, and passing it up, is not something that a lot of players do lightly, even for the for the defensive prowess that Kremlin gives you. So it will be Golden Gate, and no surprises on the other side. It will be School of Cavalry from Gully's French.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a particularly important spawn that we're seeing here, as the French player has most of the resources projected towards the front. The Roost player has them a little bit more spread out to the back and to the sides. And so although you, with your fast castle Roost, don't really need any gold, as you are going to be selling most of your wood for gold as you try to fast castle with your Golden Gate, you can still see a considerable advantage from having those resources more safe towards the back line here. Okay, so Gully Deckel, obviously on French, is going to be looking to do some aggression, but how will he find it? That's the difficulty of playing against a civilization that does need to gather food outside of their base and gold outside of their base.
Well said indeed. Part of it will be because of that Golden Gate, as we mentioned, right? A simple wooden fortress to boost your wood income, will allow you to also keep your wood villagers safe from a dive, especially from the knights, of course. But we do see more scouts being added here by Avery, which could potentially be a play towards pro scouts here, which is something we have seen time and time again from the Rus, especially when going for this type of a castle age play, which is likely what Avery will look to head into by the way he is splitting his economy at this point in time. And yeah, I'm quite curious to see how Gully decides to answer this, right? He will really want to stop the free ferrying of those deer back towards the safety of Avery's base, right? Without a doubt. But to what level do you commit to units here in order to prevent that, right? Because ultimately, horse archers will be coming out and they will deal en masse quite effectively with your knights, also outrunning them at the same time. So what do you believe, Valdemar? What's a good way to execute here? Do you invest into a lot of knights as well as archers to deal with the horse archers, or do you maybe just go one or two knights, stop a free pro scouts, and go for your own timing?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a difficult one. I do believe, however, that if you have a spawn where wood lines are projected forward, like Avery's Roost is, then you will be gaining more value from sticking to the feudal age, making knights, making archers, as the archers will be countering those horse archers. The problem, however, is if your opponent goes to Castle Age, is able to gather gold, and thus able to now get Castle Age knights, because they will be able to counter the French knights and archers in the feudal age.
Yes, that's true indeed. And archers specifically is something that not too many players think of as a counter to horse archers, especially in the feudal age. But ultimately, if you do have enough of them, and you're able to start focusing down those horse archers from your opponent because they shouldn't have too many due to investing so many resources in the castle age, that could be quite an effective tool to constrain the amount of running around that those horse archers can do, as they would really like to do. But we do see an interesting little wall here by Gully Deco. For quite a cheap price, he's able to completely deny that deer pack from Avery, not only in terms of pros cards, but also in gathering. So I must actually really, really like this. This is a particular perk of EGC Lipany, as quite often we have these small hills spawning like this with only one choke entrance. And oftentimes the deer can spawn on one of these hills, as we see here. So quite a nice little play by Gully, I would say.
Yeah, I actually really, really like this play because now he doesn't really need to focus on the right side. He's even dropping a mill here to slowly gather them. He can now take all of his military units and just have them wander around the top side here. And that's going to be all that Gully needs to full deny deers, to full deny gold, to full deny half of the wood line. And that's the real deal here. You want to try to minimize the amount of area you need to cover. Even if you have the mobility of the knights, you're still looking to have your units together for the most part. Otherwise, you will potentially get caught off guard.
And look at this Valdemar. Behind this, Avery not only went all the way up to 7 scouts, which is quite a huge amount to go into, even when going for this type of pro scouts play, I would say. But also spears now being added in behind this, which sure will help deal with the knights and potentially gather a few more deer, but this quite severely delays your castle age even further, right? Not only having to invest in the barracks, but ultimately you also can't sell your wood as aggressively as you would like at the Golden Gate. And really, with archers already out on the field for Gully as well, I mean, Avery might be able to secure these few, I believe 3 deer are left here, if I'm not mistaken. Really, is it 4 deer? It looks like is it really worth it delaying your castle age by this much? Oh, actually, no, it's most of the deer back. Yeah, still left here. I think he gathered only 1, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, I mean, 5 space, 5 more in queue as well as horsemen. This looks to be a bit of a more extended feudal age play by Avery, perhaps more so than he would have originally liked. And with such a delay on doing this, with no economic upgrades behind this, I gotta say, I much prefer Gully's position.
Yeah, Gully's position is good if he plays it out correctly and he doesn't mess up. Then for sure it's a good position to play out. But the problem might lie in the fact that if Avery gets control of this early feudal, mid feudal, and he's able to take back the deers and ferry them to his base, trying to attack that when there's also defensive force versus if your opponent just fast castles as a French player, that's a lot more difficult than if you didn't have to deal with any of the enemy units. And remember, horsemen and spearmen double counter the archers and knights coming out from the French player, and so a defensive position might just end up being better. We'll have to wait and see, however, how long he will take until he goes for that push, because ultimately Goldie's going to have to go out on the map as well. And so a little bit of units from Avely can end up providing a tremendous amount of value.
They really can, as we have seen it manifest firsthand there, with 2 knights going down for free for Gully Deco here. Such an expensive loss at this stage in the game. Just a little bit, his attention being split on too many fronts there for Gully. Quite unfortunate losing those 2 knights like that. That's definitely a lot of damage. But so far, still both units, like you mentioned, both players, excuse me, committing to feudal age here. A lot of spears out now for Avely. There's not quite enough archers yet to deal with this level of a spear mass, I would say. But then again, there's not too many horsemen out either to deal with the archers that we do have at this point in time. And I'm not sure how, when it will come to this engagement, what it will look like exactly, because Avely does opt instead to go to torch down that wood in the south, the wooden wall in the south, opting for the gate there, as the one villager is suddenly finding himself in a very, very precarious position, being forced to singularly repair that wall, but the villager will go down, as will the wall. Gully's army is mobilizing now towards the south there in order to prevent this, and I think this is where we will see our first real engagement.
Yeah, the French Knights comes in, and together with the archers, they're able to counter some of the units here. And if, as long as he doesn't take a full head-on fight against the horseman spearman mass, then it will be a pretty good situation for Gully's French here. But as you can see, Avery's moving around that corridor. He's getting around that hill, and so the natural cliffs here end up becoming a little bit more of a defensive position for him, where he can run and scutter back to his base here. And that's really what you want. You want to rebuild here because you have got the lead. You've got more units than your opponent, and that's a really important thing to consider. Knights are expensive. Every knight costs the same as 3 spears, and so you can get a mass up, and that mass, if it counters your opponent, is going to be able to deal with it.
Absolutely right. And this, this composition of horseman spear against archer horse or archer knight in this case, of course, is such a timeless little matchup of compositions, right? There's always been hotly debated which it favors exactly. Really, it does come down to essentially the way the fight is taken, right? If the spearman and horseman mass can almost fully envelop the knight and archer mass, it would definitely favor them, I would say. But with effective kiting and use of terrain to their advantage, I do believe the archer knight composition will come out on top. But we do have Gully's own spearman being added here, which particularly I'm not so much of a fan of when playing a knight civilization, but I guess the threat of Avery's own knights coming into the mix is a possibility, of course, which Gully might be thinking of with Beastie behind him, naturally. So it's not, I don't mind it so much in this matchup because it does make it, part of the difficulty with running a tricomp is, of course, the difficulty in controlling all of the units effectively. So, although you have the bases of counters covered, so to say, actually microing all 3 at the same time effectively is definitely easier on paper than in practicality.
Yeah, and I think the main benefit as well from running the tri-comp, the spear, archer, and knights is all of a sudden you're not fully investing into knights, which are of course countered by the full investment into spear. You're also now adding in just more units that are cheaper, which means you have a greater meat shield that you can use in terms of taking the straight up fights. You can then have the spears in the front, then the knights come in from behind, and they are not taking the blunt force from the spearman mass. And that's important when we talk about engagements here. First off, we have to deal with a full spear army as a French player, and that's often tough if we don't have anything that can deter them from getting into contact with our main army. Because we got to remember, spear horseman is a classic A move composition, and now this is pretty bad if you're in Gully's position. You're getting your boar completely denied here, your biggest food source, 8 villagers are down here, and there goes your natural passive villager advantage.
And this is such a risk that you just have to consider and calculate when going out onto these external boards, especially when they are so center map, right? I mean, this is something you can see in the fog of war, right? You can see if the ball is there or not. This has been a feature since the game's inception. So ultimately, Ivley must have seen that ball, and he knew then that that is the place to strike. And, he managed to save one at least, but still, 7 villages down hurts so much as the French in this position. You do not want to be on even villager count as he is right now with the Rus. And behind this, we saw, as Cal highly rightly highlighted, a lot of Gully's deer was stolen right from under his villages by Avery scouts in that northern side as well. So more and more food being denied from Gully in this position. And I think at this point in time, and looking at Avery's macro, that's exactly what he's thinking as well. After securing such a lead, this is definitely a great time to now opt for a castle age as you have your composition nicely set up in a defensible spot under your town center like this.
Yeah, it can be a good position to play from, but you also got to remember that even though you've got a greater military mass, your units are fundamentally lower quality. If he greets out too early here, it is an opportunity for Gully Deckle to go for a good push and potentially go for a victory here simply just by exploiting the fact that Abely is not producing units. 1800 resources is a lot of resources, but look at this now, the horsemen on the back line. This is such a terrible, terrible thing to happen when you're about to do a push. Your whole economy is idled out, and you've lost 7 villages already. Now more are being idled out. Knights are being pulled back and in an attempt here to try to defend these villages, but it's really such a terrible thing for you to have happen for you simply due to the fact that you're now not getting any food.
You very prudently highlighted the importance of recognizing that castle timing for Avery in order to not, end up dying to a severe dive by Gully's army. And this kind of space is exactly what you need if you're in Avery's position to be able to get up to that castle gate safely. So many villagers not only being idled out, but also killed, as that scout from Avery really made that play possible, blocking off the wall on the last segment there in order for the horsemen to catch up to the villagers and envelop so many of them. And this is really, really painful for Gully now, because not only is he stuck chasing this horseman with units that can't actually catch up to them unless he cuts them off completely with his own army from another side, but behind this, you have Avely going up to the castle with a high trade house, which also Gully may have potentially spotted the migration of the villagers towards that southern wood line, but being distracted on so many fronts, it's somewhat unlikely, I would say, because the output does not provide vision of the landmark itself. And once we're leading in army count as well, sure, there's the knights for Gully at this point in time, but now finding himself behind in villages and economy, it's once this cartridge comes in and the upgrades start rolling through, I think that A move is that you highlighted earlier, Valdemar, is something we're very likely to see from Avery.
Yeah, as a viewer, you might think, oh, these units are low quality and whatnot, but you've got that age advantage. You got to remember, once this army's upgraded, the army value skyrockets. He could take a fight right now and probably still come out on top, or he could upgrade his units and then take a fight and win the game. So it's all about that. He's got to get his archers upgraded, he's got to get his horsemen and spears upgraded, and he will eventually be able to do so much damage with this massive ball of wood units, really, but they're going to be very high quality compared to the enemy's army. Now the horsemen on the left side are still raiding, and so even if they are to take a fight here, there's still damage to be had. And just as we highlighted in the Holy Island game, a lot of the times when we take a look at these main fights, they might have a lot of posturing, they might have a lot of back and forth, but what really matters is the couple of units that you send to the back of your opponent's base. And now, rightly so, the gold villagers here are being fully idled. Some of them may even be taken out as well, and so you're now stuck with an idle economy. You have to push in your opponent's castle age. It's such a tough position.
It's incredibly tough, isn't it? It's quite similar dynamic to we saw in that very first game in this set, where you find yourself an age behind and you're stuck in this really rough situation of needing to produce more units to survive, but also having to go up the castle age eventually in order to not fall completely behind and get run over by superior units in this case. As for now, Gully is keeping Avely contained, but as like you can see, it's 2 more knights and 2 more archers. The still units being produced, sub 100 food for Gully Deckel's bank at this point in time, as he does take the fight now, but the archers are upgraded and veteran now for Avely, so the damage that they're going to be doing is absolutely substantial, even to the Gully Deckel's knights at this point in time. You see, most of Avely's front line is falling down, but so many knights as well falling for Gully Deckel. The amount of resources sunk is absolutely immense at this point in time. Now, almost double the army count of Gully Avely is at this point in time, as well as being ahead in economically, not only with villages, but in terms of passive resource generation as well. And the horsemen, like you highlighted, they weren't even in this fight, Valdemar. They were still raiding, picking off reinforcements, and still it's a complete cleanup for Avely almost, with only some straggling archers managing to escape there. But for how long, as another patch of villages gets found on the berries, and with that, as expected, the game is scored 5-0 in favor of Avely here. Very good result for Team MarineLord.
An incredible 5-0 here with Avely showcasing how a tech advantage can really just come in and play such a massive role in what is going to be an only 18-minute game, but with one big fight, if you got that extra attack damage on your range units, no knights in the feudal age are going to be able to deal with that. And